Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Paisley Catkins was my grandmother. She lived in a tiny, whimsical little white brick cottage in the middle of the woods in the bluegrass state of Kentucky. She was an independent, self-sufficient woman who had lived on her own most of her life, as her husband died in his early 30s after contracting a bad bout of pneumonia. I had grown up in Houston in Texas and had little contact with my grandmother, so I knew very little about her, as she never turned up for family Christmases or Thanksgivings, but preferred to remain exactly where she was, favouring the solitude of the natural world than being with the family. Every year she would send me a beautiful knitted sweater, but I had never actually met her. When I was 14 years old, my mother suggested I go and stay with her for a while. "My mother's a bit of a loner," she admitted to me, "somewhat of a recluse, but I think it would be fabulous for you to become acquainted with her, as me and your father are going on a business trip together. This would be the perfect time for you to go and stay with her." "But what if she doesn't want me there?" I protested. "I mean, she shunned every family invite for Christmas and Thanksgiving, so she clearly doesn't want family around." "It's complicated," said my mother. "I wouldn't say shunned, I'd say politely declined." "It's the same thing, isn't it?" I piped. My mother was chopping carrots on a wooden board in the kitchen for the casserole that she was preparing. She handed me some tomatoes to slice for the salad. My mother never stopped chopping for a moment, but she did look reflective. "You know, your grandmother didn't have an easy life growing up as a young girl. She was the eldest of 3 children, very different to her 2 other sisters. She was creative, individualistic and imaginative. They were studious and academic. It seemed that her mother favoured the other 2 siblings over her oldest daughter, fussing over them all the time, buying them fabulous things, but just ignoring her oldest. She would come home having shopped with her 2 younger children, always leaving Paisley out, who would be left at home all on her own. They would return home to show my mother what they'd bought, but my mother never got a single thing. Can you imagine how that would make you feel, seeing your siblings spoilt rotten, but you get nothing? She said sometimes she felt as if she was watching her family through a glass pane, as if she didn't exist. She felt like a ghost in her own household. Just imagine that. "That's disgusting," I said. "So unfair. Blatant discrimination. What kind of a mother behaves like that?" Of course it distressed my mother, because such favouritism meant she felt as if she wasn't good enough, and there was something wrong with her. But she grit her lip and got on with her life, accepting the status quo. When she got older, she asked her mother if she could borrow money to buy something smart for a job interview that she was applying for at a pharmacy. Her mother refused to even loan her the money. But when the youngest daughter asked for a dress the very same day for a barbecue the following weekend, of course the mother didn't flinch and bought her daughter that dress. Your grandmother never forgot the injustice of that. It was like a kick in the teeth to her. My mother said that it was the teachers at her school that would go on and on about her. What an exceptional young girl she was. So creative, so talented. But her mother failed to see it. Instead, her mother complained bitterly that the teachers weren't complimenting her 2 other children. Why did they keep going on about Paisley, when it was her other 2 children that were the stars, she would say begrudgingly. It sounds a bit like a Cinderella story. I hadn't thought about it like that. I believe my mother's childhood and the way her own family distanced themselves from her was the reason that she withdrew from people, which explains why she doesn't interact socially, prefers her own company. I get it now, I said. I mean, who'd want to hang around people who are looking down on you? It's so much better to be alone in that case. That's why, sweetheart, never judge someone else's actions, because sometimes their actions are born from a place of hurt. But are you sure my grandmother would want me around if she's as reclusive as you say? Her grandchild? Heavens, yes! She'll be delighted to see you. She's a lovely lady. You will really, really like her. I was naturally excited to meet my grandmother, who'd been spoken about so warmly by my mother on multiple occasions, but I'd never had the privilege to meet her. As for her mysterious cottage in the woods, it had been a purchase of my grandmother's in more recent years. My mother had been absolutely appalled when she'd learnt the news. "Why would you buy a house in the middle of the woods?" she complained. "It's not safe for an old woman like you to live on your own like this in a remote area. What if you have a nasty fall, or you get bitten by a snake? Who's going to help you? Regina, you do worry your head way too much. If I get bitten by a snake and succumb to its lethal venom, I'm okay with that. It means that that's the way the good Lord wants me to go. I'm not going to live a life tucked away in a suburban suburb. I want to be close to nature. If it means that I'm taking risks, then so be it. I'd rather live a fulfilling life than a safe one. Besides, I won't be living too far away from town." "But, Mum—" "No buts, dear. This is my decision to make, not yours." I remember the day the taxi drove me to Grandma Paisley's home. The truck drove down the smooth ribbon of asphalt, taking a left-hand turn onto a dusty red road, where the rubber tyres lifted up the powdery dust in the air that was causing us to cough and splutter in the taxi. Then it took a swift right-hand turn onto a long bumpy road that was filled with potholes and covered in rocks, where it wobbled precariously, jolting up and down. There was a wide opening in some trees where the truck finally entered, and there, bang in the middle of this wooded sanctuary, surrounded by clusters of red maples, serviceberries and oak trees, was the prettiest house that I've ever seen. It would seem the light from the forest canopy twinkled and sparkled through the trees, dancing over the contours of the house in pretty ethereal shafts of light. It was like the whole house glistened and gleamed. It was a very cute house with a stone facade and brick walls all painted in white. The ornate, stylish front door was an electric blue colour. It was so bewitching and charmed, something that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Hans Andersen fairy tale. "Nice place you've got here," said the taxi driver. "This dreamy cottage is pure poetry. But that bloody road to get here is one hell of a liability. I'm dreading the drive back. Are you going to be all right? Do you want to check if someone's in or not?" "No, I'll be fine," I assured the taxi driver, thanking him, while he removed my suitcase from the trunk. I watched him driving away. His truck groaned, heaved, jolted and wobbled down that obstacle course of a road, until he was nothing but a dot in the distance. I walked to the front door and tapped it gently. It creaked wide open. "Anyone there?" I called, but there was no answer. I entered the unpretentious cottage, was greeted to a cheerful, cosy, mellow interior, designed for comfort in every regard. It was simplistic, homely, but stylish, with soft, cushy white leather couches, bright, colourful scatter cushions in warm, rich reds, golds, oranges and burgundies. There were fluffy white rugs strewn generously over the gleaming, polished oakwood floors, the perfect place to nestle cold feet on bitter, chilly winter nights. There were fireplaces with marble mantels in virtually every room, including the living area. The main living area boasted floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, bursting at the seams with interesting, fascinating-looking books, while the butter-coloured walls were covered in sumptuous tapestries, enchanting pictures of woodland scenes, and profusive, ornate-looking mirrors, while the sash windows looked out onto spectacular views of the statuesque emerald-green forest. The glass sliding doors in the living room opened out into a well-appointed wraparound porch that was comfortably decked out with swanky upholstered chairs and a prodigal round oakwood dinner table. It rarely overlooked the most stunning stream with a natural waterfall where the exuberant fountains of fast-moving opaque water with creaming white froth crashed down the rocky cliff face to the pools of water below. "Hello, dear," came a soft voice. I turned around to see my grandmother, who was smiling at me, a warm, bright, sunny smile. She dashed over to me lovingly, enveloping me in her arms with a generous, warm hug. "Let's have a look at you," she said, stepping back. "Let me see. Yes, you do rather remind me of your mother when you were her age. The same petite bone structure, the long dark black hair, the pretty blue eyes. But you're also strikingly different in another way. Maybe it's your energy, I'm not sure," she said indecisively. "I can't quite fathom what it is, but never you mind. I'll soon work it out." My grandmother was a woman in her 80s, although I never did find out her exact age. I knew better than to ask such an indiscreet question. She was a petite woman of over 4 foot tall, with a full head of white, buoyant, curly hair, and the brightest blue eyes I've ever seen, that sparkled with a lively, animated energy. Her paper-thin, delicate skin was well creased, with many crinkled expression lines around the contours of her wizened eyes. There were time-worn furrows on her forehead. She was dressed in a stylish pair of contemporary white cotton pants, with a sophisticated soft pink cashmere cardigan, with a vertical line of elegant pearl buttons that was complemented by a chic string of pearls that she wore around her neck, while her tiny little feet were decked out in an ultra-modern pair of white pumps. She looked tastefully dressed, elegant but casual. "So what do you think of my quaint, rather twee fairy tale cottage tucked away in the heart of the woods? Isn't it so idyllic?" "I think it's beautiful," I agreed. "But living out here on your own, surely you get lonely." "Not really, dear. When you get to my age, you crave peace and quiet. You cherish tranquility. I love nothing better than being close to the trees and the water. It energizes my spirit. I do make regular trips into town to stock up on supplies. I visit the church every Sunday. So no, I'm not lonely. No, I'm never lonely." That evening my grandmother and I sat around a cosy crackling fire in the living room, watching the flames crackle and spit. It felt as if we'd known each other all our lives. She was so easy to be around, informal, uncomplicated, warm-hearted, benevolent, the kind of person that is energizing and uplifting, rather than draining and exhausting. I felt serene, complacent, placid around her, as I did with the trees in my yard at home and around my cat Molly, who was always unconditionally loving. Perhaps it was also that she had no expectations in me, but accepted me as I was, while my parents were always looking for ways that I could improve myself. It was fall, and so there was a bracing chill in the air, and the crackling fire enveloped us in a cosy warmth. That was when I asked my grandmother if there was any time that she had been afraid living out here in the woods, and then she told me her remarkable story. My grandmother took a neat sip of her sherry, paused for a moment, wringing her fingers together. "Are you sure you want to hear this?" "Absolutely certain," I said. "All my life I fantasized about living in the woods. For some reason I've always been drawn to the trees, so I was on the lookout for acquiring a property that fit the bill. I contacted a number of estate agents to let them know exactly what I was looking for. I said I wanted a little white brick and stone quaint little cottage situated in the middle of the woods, overlooking the water. And you know what they said to me?" I shrugged my shoulders. "No. What did they say?" "I'm sorry, man, but it's most improbable that you will find anything exactly like that. So you might consider compromising, settling for a wooden cabin, perhaps." I said absolutely not. It must be a small white cottage built from brick and stone. Of course, they went through the motions of humouring me. They said they'd be in touch if they found anything that fit the description. But I could tell by the bland, uninspiring, lifeless tones in their voices that they had me down as a finicky, fussy, cantankerous customer that wasn't easily satisfied and would be very difficult to please. Weeks passed and I never heard so much as a dicky bird from the estate agents, so I phoned them up again, asking them whether they had any luck in finding my white cottage. One of the estate agents, a delightful young lady called Victoria Pierce, said, "How do you know about the white cottage? It's only come on the market today. When did you say you'd like to see it?" I made an appointment with the woman to see the cottage. The moment my truck drove down this driveway, gliding through the trees, I gasped in astonishment when I saw this whimsical, quaint, quirky white cottage. I was transfixed to see that it mirrored the idiosyncratic cottage I'd been dreaming about years before. It was as if the perfect picture of my dreams had morphed into our reality. I mean, how was that even possible? I was flabbergasted and confounded. You mean the cottage was exactly the same as the one you had been hoping to acquire? The one you'd visualized owning in your mind's eye? Exactly the same, right down to the tiny details of the blue front door. I remember I just stood there gawking, staring at the cottage as if I'd seen a ghost. The estate agent got out of her truck. She walked over to me. I was so bedazzled and enamoured by the cottage, I barely noticed her standing there. "Are you all right, madam?" she asked me. "You look as white as a sheet. Can I get you a glass of water?" Naturally, I assured her I'd be fine, but after a quick look around the cottage, I told her I would take the place at its asking price. I wasn't about to negotiate for something I wanted. Negotiation always comes with a risk. I wasn't about to take a risk. I knew I must have the cottage. That was when the estate agent revealed the bad news to me. She told me that the eccentric old lady that lived at the cottage was not willing to sell the house to anyone. She would need to interview the buyer first before she gave the all clear for the sale to go ahead. As you can imagine, I was gobsmacked by this outlandish expectation. The agent said to me, "I'll be completely straight with you. 3 years ago, this capricious old lady put her cottage on the market. Dozens of people put in offers for the unorthodox little place. The old lady insisted on interviewing all of them before she agreed to sell, and none of the potential buyers met with her approval. I'm telling you this," she told me, "as I don't really fancy your chances in acquiring the cottage, given what happened last time. The woman is very strange." Naturally, I knew I had nothing to lose. I mean, this cottage existed in my dreams. Surely it was meant for me. It was arranged that I would meet the lady of the cottage for afternoon tea that day. "I want to tell you, my dear," said my grandmother, squeezing my arm tightly. I was so terrified. I've been nervous before in my life, on many occasions, for interviews, exams, important occasions, but not like this, never like this. I was trembling as I arrived at the cottage doors, my knees buckling beneath me, while in the back of my throat I had this huge lump. The old woman gestured me into the house. She was a slight woman, not too different from me now that I'm her age, actually. She wore very funky spectacles, shaped into butterfly wings in bright pink, and she wore bright pink lipstick and pink clothing. She looked at me intently and gestured for me to sit down on her pink ottoman, and then she asked me why I wanted to buy her cottage. I said, "I've seen it in my dreams. It's calling my name." She said to me, "It's possibly because it is. I think we can safely say I found the buyer for my home. Congratulations." "And that was it?" I asked. "That was it. I think the estate agent virtually had a heart attack when the old lady agreed to sell me the cottage. So I moved into the property forthwith, and for the first time in my life I felt like I belonged. A little like an old slipper going missing and being reunited with its other half. It was as if I'd always belonged here. One night after I retired to bed, I suddenly heard a banging sound, as if someone was pounding the house, as the vibration seemed to roll across the wooden floor, causing the furniture to rattle, and even my own bed began to wobble unsteadily. Then the front door was thrust violently off its hinges, and gusts of icy cold air came rushing through the house. I sat up in bed thinking, what the heck is going on? I remember my heart was thundering violently in my chest. My guts felt as if they'd been ripped out of my body. I began to panic. In seconds, 2 young men both barged into my bedroom. Their heads were covered in stockings. On the stockings they were wearing headlamps. They were pointing rifles at me, demanding me to show them where the money was. "Woman, take us to your stash of cash," they yelled. "Now!" I felt I'd woken up in the middle of a horror movie. It seemed all so surreal to me. I'd been half asleep, so to wake up with these 2 men yelling at me and pointing rifles in my face was bizarre, to say the least. I trembled as I climbed out of bed in my white nightgown, while the rifle was thrust violently in my back. I delicately scampered into the kitchen and pointed to the biscuit tin. "The money's in there," I said. They pulled out a few dollar notes and scattered them on the floor, screaming, "Is this a bloody joke, woman? We're not easily fooled. We didn't come here for pittance. Tell us where the rest of the loot is." We have it on good authority that you keep a sleeping bag stashed with lots of cash in this house. Thousands and thousands of dollars, we believe. You're scared of banks, aren't you? We want that money now. We know you've got it. I don't keep cash in the house. I trembled. But look around. You can take anything you want. But please, please don't hurt me. Don't lie, woman. Word around town is that you do have thousands of dollars in a sleeping bag. Don't pull the wool over our eyes. Well, maybe the previous owner did, but not me. I've only recently moved into this cottage. You must have your wires crossed. It's not me that's got thousands of dollars stashed away at home. They started to hit me with the back of their rifles. Where's the loot? They screamed. If you don't tell us, we will kill you. I knew that this was not going to end well, as these men were volatile and unhinged. I started to think quickly on my feet. I told them I'd hidden the cash in the tool shed. Why I said that I can't really fathom. Maybe it was to stop them hitting me so hard, as they were really hurting me. My body was throbbing and aching with pain, and I was crying. My plan was to escape and hide somewhere in the woodgrove under the cover of darkness, where that would be my greatest opportunity to escape these brutal men. They marched me by the back of my shoulders to the tool shed. It wasn't too dark, as the moon was full and the stars plentiful, so visibility was excellent. They thundered around the tool shed, rooting through everything. Where is the loot, woman? They screamed. Show us now. I acted vague, indeterminate, confused. I pretended my memory was foggy, which made them exceedingly mad with me. I don't remember. I do remember I put it somewhere here, but I can't remember. It's somewhere around here. They kept hurling insults at me. They began to tear the tool shed apart, looking in tins, old baskets, boxes, you name it, thrusting them out of the shed into the yard, where they littered everything with chaos and old paint cans, yard tools and camping equipment, literally peppered the ground. They were kicking things with their feet violently, ripping everything up in sight. Regretfully, I didn't have a chance to escape, as one of the men kept his steely eyes pinned on me. I was scared of them not getting what they were looking for, as I could see they were becoming murderous in their rage. Their anger was escalating every passing second. Don't get any funny ideas, woman. If you so much as try to escape, it's a bullet in the head for you. Why are you doing this to me? I trembled. Get over yourself, woman. It's nothing personal. We need the money. I promise you I knew those men wouldn't hesitate to shoot me. I was only glad they were wearing stockings on their head, as it meant that there was a possibility I could come out of this alive, as they were covering their identities, which could mean that they weren't intending to murder me. They wanted to make sure that I couldn't identify them. All of a sudden you could hear this thumping, crashing noise coming from the trees. The only way I can describe it was it sounded as if a huge train was hurtling through the woods towards us. I could hear tree limbs shaking, leaves rustling, branches breaking and cracking. The two men looked startled. They looked around themselves nervously. "What the heck is that?" they said. While the men were slightly distracted by the noise, I attempted to run away, but one of the men grabbed me by the collar of my nightgown so that I fell onto the ground. He stared at me with enraged eyes. "No, you don't," he shrieked. "There's no money, is there?" he said, growling. "You're leading us up the garden path, aren't you? There's no bloody money." I nodded. "I'm sorry. I told you I don't keep money in the house." "It's too late for sorries." He was about to kick me with his heavy combat boots. Then suddenly a dark silhouette came thundering towards us like a great big dense giant blob of black. The men both screamed, "Bloody hell! What the heck?" This dark humanoid being, shaped like a giant covered in hair, grabbed one of the men, hurling him up in the air like a Catherine wheel. The other man, on seeing what was happening to his friend, literally let out a shrill scream and began to run as fast as he could, not even waiting for his friend, as his only interest was in saving his own skin. He couldn't get away fast enough. While the bizarre creature continued to whirl the terrifying man in the air a couple more times, catching him in mid-flight like a frisbee. Then finally he put him on the ground. The man, now safely on terra firma, began to hightail it as fast as he could away from the cottage. He began screaming, "It's a Bigfoot! It's a Bigfoot! Bloody hell, it's a goddamn Bigfoot! Get out of here! It's going to kill us!" The creature began mock chasing him, releasing these ear-piercing screams, throwing rocks after the men. Once the men had gone, I was so stunned, confounded, and completely flabbergasted. I didn't know what to think, because whatever this creature was, he'd saved my life. I was shaking so much and trembling. The creature led me to a tree and got me to sit down against the tree trunk for support. The one thing I knew with absolute certainty was that those men would never be coming back, and they never did. But I didn't know who they were, or why there was a rumour in town that I kept a stash of money, thousands of dollars in a sleeping bag. "What?" I gasped. "The creature that saved your life? It was a Bigfoot?" Now I know that to be the case. Back then I wasn't sure what it was. Yes, it was a Bigfoot. "What did it look like?" I asked. Well, this Bigfoot was about 8 foot tall, with long flowing dark hair and a conical-shaped head. Truly, it looked like a giant human being covered with hair. "Wow," I said. "Did you ever see it again?" "It has a name," my grandmother told me. "I call him Shadow." "Are you saying that he's still around?" I asked. "If he is, will I meet him?" "Oh, I'm not sure about that," said my grandmother, looking at me honestly. "Shadow knows you're here, as his kind know everything that's going on. They're very sensitive to changes in the environment. They know when a stranger's around, and when they do, they keep their distance. You see, when I moved into this cottage, the creatures got used to me, as they possibly did the old lady before me. I would hasten to say that I'm sure they had some kind of interaction with her, something she was not inclined to share with me, and rightly so. There are 3 Bigfoot living here, Shadow, his female partner, and a little youngling. Well, they're not like regular humans. They're exceedingly ambiguous, evasive, enigmatic, and elusive. In truth, I've only ever had fleeting glances of his female partner. She's so bashful, shy, and self-effacing. She often shrinks into the shadows behind the tree, watching me. Her youngling is equally as reticent and demure, but inquisitively curious nevertheless. Shadow is quite comfortable, complacent, and at ease in my presence, has often joined me when I've gone foraging for mushrooms and berries, and has helped me gather stuff. He often leaves me some rainbow trout on my front door, as he knows I love fish. He keeps a watch over the cottage all the time. I believe he sees the cottage, me, and these woods as his territory. So you mark my words, I'm safe here, as those creatures have my back. But as for you getting a glimpse of one of these creatures, I think it's highly unlikely. I was enjoying spending time with my grandmother and learning all about her life. I wanted to understand why she enjoyed solitude rather than interacting with people, as I was to understand that she didn't have many friends, but it seemed these guardians of the forest had become her unlikely companions. I awoke up one night to hear some whistling. The whistling was intent. It demanded my attention. I sat up and crept over to the windowsill. I could hear my grandmother open the front door. I looked out of the window. Luckily the moon was bright that night, so I could see Grandma Paisley standing next to this tall black creature that I realized must be Shadow. I could feel my heart thumping excitedly in my chest, for the hope of seeing Shadow had dimmed after my grandmother had told me it would be improbable that I would ever get to meet him. Yet I could see him clearly, larger than life, but my attention was focused on his leathery human-like face and the jubilant expression that he was wearing. Shadow appeared to be jumping up and down on his huge legs like an excitable dog, chattering away in a foreign language that I've never heard before, speaking incredibly fast. He kept pointing towards the woods. My grandmother slipped back into the house, grabbed her dressing gown, while she wrapped it around her frail form. She placed her head torch on her head, and she walked hurriedly after the creature. I wasted no time at all in throwing on my jeans and a sweatshirt and a pair of sneakers and dashing down the stairs out of the front door, where I was greeted by gusty, icy cold air. I chose to keep a safe distance behind my grandmother, and Shadow trying best not to be seen by them. The wind whistled through the trees, while fallen leaves floated in the wind like celestial butterflies. The boughs of the oak and maple trees seemed to move gently in the wind, as if they were dancing, while the crisp autumn leaves covered the forest floor in golden leaves. Even though there were no sounds from crickets or frogs, the woodgrove felt peaceful and tranquil. I crunched the leaves beneath my feet with every step. I had to be very cautious about being as discreet as I possibly could. I followed the duo into the woods, hiding behind trees at every given opportunity. It was then that I saw the female Bigfoot with her youngling at her side in a clearing in the woods. I stopped dead in my tracks, hardly daring to believe what I was observing. She was in the throes of giving birth. I could hardly believe it. She was squatting on the ground on her haunches, sweating, grunting and groaning as she started to push. She seemed surprised to see my grandmother on the scene, watching her, but I think the pain had abolished her fear. She almost welcomed the presence of another female. My grandmother moved cautiously towards the creature. The light of her headlamp enabled me to see it clearly. My grandmother reached for the creature's hand and squeezed it firmly in hers. It got lost in her big sausage-like fingers of the female, dwarfing my grandmother so much that she looked like a tiny doll next to the creature. Her bright brown eyes looked illuminated with excited anticipation and gratitude, as well as pain, all rolled into one. "Go on, you can do it," my grandmother urged. "Push, push. Come on, you can do it. Push," she kept saying. Her gentle words were encouraging, kind, reassuring. Shadow was in the corner watching the scene unfold, continuously jumping up and down on his legs. He was so excited. I've never seen anyone look that jubilant before. He looked like a proud father-to-be, as his bright, deep-set dark eyes set in his leathery face looked so enthused, while the youngling, a 4-foot-tall, lanky, thin male, appeared to be behaving exactly like his father. There was an exuberant electric buzz in the air. I realized my grandmother's calm energy must have been very stabilizing and soothing in this fired-up atmosphere, when some calm energy was gladly appreciated by the poor female. Finally, with one last anguished cry, a baby emerged from her womb, a grey-coloured creature with a fine scattering of black hair. There were rapturous whoops from the father and son, while the female creature severed the umbilical cord with a sharp stone. Then she gathered her baby in her arms, cradling her to her chest, her brown eyes filled with a mother's joy and pride. She patted the baby's back, and it let out a strange cry. My grandmother was saying, "Well done, girl! You did it! You did it!" She rubbed her hands on the creature's forehead to wipe away the sweat with her hands. "You did it, girl! Well done! You did it!" The Bigfoot mother looked absolutely thrilled. Her brown eyes sparkled with joy. She handed the baby over to my grandmother. Grandmother Paisley cuddled the baby in her arms. Tears were pouring down her face. "It's a girl! It's so beautiful! So beautiful!" I was so in awe of this magical, arresting scene that I moved away from the trees towards the Bigfoot and her baby. I wanted to hold the beautiful baby like my grandmother had done. For a second the Bigfoots were surprised by my presence, but nothing could dampen their enthusiasm. They graciously welcomed me into their circle of celebration. The mother handed me her baby to hold. I cuddled it closely in my arms. It looked upon me with the most intelligent, shining, warm eyes, and my heart melted like butter. After this incredible, awesome event, my grandmother was so moved that the Bigfoots had chosen to include us, well, rarely her, in the celebration of the birth of their baby. In the days that followed, the female creature would bring her baby girl to us so that we could cuddle the little thing. The act of giving birth had banished the female's former reticence. In the years that followed, my grandmother's relationship with the Bigfoot family grew very strong. My grandmother died 20 years ago, but this poignant memory of watching a mother Bigfoot give birth will forever stay with me, as it was one of the most moving experiences of my entire life. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I was so excited about my online house swap. I loved the sound of the warm, generous American lady on the end of the telephone called Jenna Hudson. I was swapping our home in the Scottish Highlands with the congenial American couple, who had both converted a chapel into a home in an area close to Mount Rainier. We were engaging in the house swap at an unseasonable time of the year, but then why not? Me and my husband were desperate for a change. So what if it was in the middle of winter? It would still be fun, wouldn't it? "I have to tell you, Skye, you're going to adore the chapel," Jenna informed me. "It's fabulous with stained glass arch windows, old pews. We converted it into our dream home. It's very special to us. I do know how you British love a bit of history attached to your buildings. Well, our home just oodles history. It sounds absolutely delightful, I'd said. I am afraid our stone house is not as ornate as yours, but it is blissfully secluded, with lochs, mountains, a plethora of fabulously wild scenery. It's over 300 years old, so it oodles history as well. I think you and I are kindred spirits, she had joked. Your home in Scotland sounds just up my street. Me and my husband Walter have always appreciated anything historic. Many people might have thought it was nonsensical for us to go and stay in a chapel in the middle of winter. After all, don't most people go on holiday in summer or spring? Or if they do go on a winter holiday, it's much more likely to be a skiing holiday in Aspen or the Swiss Alps. This was the only time of the year my husband Lachlan and I really got off to make our escape. We were incredibly busy in the summer months, organising holidays for other people hiking in the Scottish Highlands. So it was during the winter months that our business became quiet. This was the quintessential opportunity for us to enjoy a holiday all of our own. I loved the idea of staying in a home that was converted into a chapel. I think I'd fantasised of living in a chapel with stained glass windows and pews, or converting an old church into a home. Now for a couple of weeks we were going to live this perfect dream. Well, so I thought. I'd learnt about this app online, where you could swap houses with strangers living in other countries. It was certainly an affordable way of seeing the world, at a reduced cost. It made perfect sense to us. As being Scottish, we do have a reputation for being rather thrifty. Nothing prepared me for how remote the old chapel would invariably be. Thank goodness for our GPS, or we would never have found our way to the haunting place. The one thing I never appreciated about America was the sheer size of it. Granted, we have remote areas in Scotland, but everything in America was on a much larger scale. In my humble opinion, it made it a hell of a lot easier to get hopelessly lost. It didn't help that it was snowing fiercely, so that everything looked exactly the same, as a white world can easily conceal or obscure more distinguishing landmarks. Neither my husband nor I had anticipated being caught up in a dreadful, punnelling, whipping, buffeting snowstorm, so robustly vigorous it almost swept us off the road. In our hired truck we took several sweeping, contorted turns in our all-weather tyres, but the slippery drive was very tumultuous. We were skidding all over the place. Finally we found ourselves travelling down a curved road that led to an iron farm gate with the name Pilgrim's Chapel. That was it. I visibly breathed in a huge sigh of relief. My heart began pounding with excitement. Oh my God, we're here! I can hardly believe it! We drove down a driveway that snaked towards the chapel, that seemed so inconspicuous, obscure and slight against the vastly imposing elements, the mountainous valleys, the pyramid shapes of the trees, that were all swathed in a glistening white carpet of snow. Oh, there it is, I said, as we parked our truck under the canopy of a snow-covered carport. For a fleeting moment, me and my husband stared in bewilderment at the Gothic church building. Its dark roof swaddled in thick carpets of bright gleaming snow. Its arched, brightly coloured stained-glass windows, done in rich reds, blues, greens, golds, purples and yellows, twinkled in the effusive morning light. I had believed that staying in a chapel would be a romantic, almost shamanistic experience, but as I stared at the spectral, atmospheric place, it seemed menacing, spooky, airy even. Was it my imagination, I wondered? I couldn't decide exactly what it was, but it made my skin crawl. A creepy chill pulsated down my spine. I had the inexplicable feeling that we were both being watched. I had been going on and on for months about how wonderful it would be to stay in this quaint, enchanting little chapel that I'd found online. A miraculous discovery that I thought was genius of me. Now I wasn't quite so sure. I was a starry-eyed romantic at heart, so to have to admit that this place was not already meeting my expectations was something I would not willingly concede to. I couldn't bear to hear my husband say, "I told you so. You're always too idealistic, Skye." He was always telling me that. "No wonder your parents called you Skye," he would tease. "Your head is always in the clouds." He was probably right, but I was keeping that to myself. "Well, here we are," I said, putting on a cheerful note to my voice, trying to pretend that I was feeling upbeat, when I wasn't at all. Lachlan had turned off the engine. His grim facial expression wore a resigned, rather solemn demeanour. as he stared at the bleak, lugubrious, rather plutonian building, while the lambasting wind wailed outside, thrashing, knocking, punnelling the air, as sheets of snow were flung in long gusty streams across the ground. This was certainly some windstorm. It was clear that neither of us wanted to exit the warmth of the truck, to make our brave approach to the chapel. We both just sat there soaking up our surroundings like two reluctant sponges that would rather be anywhere else in the world than here right now. The unearthly chapel was surrounded by vast groves of ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees, all dusted in white snow crystals. But under this feisty wind they swaggered like inebriated drunks, seemingly as sinister in their demeanour as the chapel itself. It was as if their needled boughs were hammering the wind in protest to our arrival, as if they too were whispering, "Go away! Go away! You're not welcome here." Finally, me and my husband gathered our courage and wits about us, along with a couple of our suitcases. We dashed quickly towards the chapel. The moment we opened the truck door, our bodies were greeted with the punnelling gusts of freezing air. It felt like our cheeks were being slapped, burned, almost anaesthetised by piercing cold hands. We trembled, shivering with the glacial conditions, while I wrapped my icy hands in a coat pocket to keep them warm. Lachlan looked for the chapel key. I began to jump up and down on the spot, trying desperately to keep warm. My teeth were chattering. I could barely even feel my own fingers, they were that numb. Our host had told us we'd find the key under the doormat. My husband finally found it. It was an enormous heavy key, the size of a human hand, decorated with fancy scrolls. He turned the key in the lock and twisted the door handle. At first we met with some resistance, as the door refused to budge, as if something was blocking it on the other side, trying not to permit us entry. Finally my husband used his boot to kick the door. It creaked open, emitting an audible groaning sound. We found ourselves staring blankly at a dark wood-panelled entrance hall, with bronze hooks for hanging coats and floor racks for boots. We didn't take off our coats, but clutched our suitcases tightly in our hands, as if reluctant about whether we were going to stay here or not. I think we both secretly wanted to grab our things and flee, but it was far too late for that. We were here now. The cheerless entrance hall was tenebrous and gloomy. We fumbled around for a light switch, but found nothing. We then opened the door at the end of the passage that blossomed into the original chapel, as there were arched stained glass windows everywhere. The chapel had been turned into open-plan living, as there was an L-shaped kitchen in the far right-hand corner that seamlessly folded into a sprawling living area, with a huge crate where a fire had already been laid, with kindling, rolled-up paper and firewood. There were a couple of cosy, well-worn sofas next to the fire, several bespoke bookcases filled with books that lined one of the walls. Then there were some oakwood pews in the far corner of the room that faced a large flat-screen television set, probably for entertainment purposes. I noticed the original uneven flagstone floors were covered in some threadbare-looking carpets that had seen better days. I immediately went over to light the fire, as the place was so bitterly cold. I could see the vapour of my own breath before my face. "Ah, there, that's better," I said. "We certainly need a fire in here." I instantly felt warmer and brighter, as the flames crackled and spitted. Even the sheer sight of the fire brought a coziness to the room that had been absent before. We turned on the lights, but they seemed rather dim. Everything was bathed in a rather purposeful soft infusion, rather than a bright luminescent electric light. "I'll go and put our suitcases in the bedroom, shall I?" said Lachlan. "I imagine it must be through there," he said, pointing towards a couple of doors, one that had a staircase that led up to the bell tower. The other one led to an adjoining bedroom and bathroom, with a large wooden sleigh bed, 2 bedstands and a closet. It was all very simple, basic, really rather rudimentary. "Oh, there's the shopping I ordered," I said to my husband, pointing to the paper bags of shopping on the oakwood kitchen counter. There was a note attached. "Welcome to America and to our chapel home. Here are all the food items you ordered. Do enjoy your stay. Have a wonderful time. Much love, Jenna and Walter." "At least we won't starve," I said, sighing with relief, as there was no way I could envisage eating out or going shopping with the howling storm out there. "Frankly," I said, "I'm amazed we got here in one piece. There was a brief moment when I thought our truck was going to go flying over the edge of that ridge. It was touch and go for a moment.
It surely was, reflected Lachlan. In truth, I did also wonder about whether we would have a catastrophic accident. The roads were so icy. I don't care what they say about these all-weather wheels, but our truck was skidding all over the place. The roads are so iced up.
Well, never you mind. We're here safe and sound now. At least we got here in one piece, having braved the gruesome elements. Let's face it, that's all that matters at the end of the day. I'll put on the kettle for a cup of tea, I said, trying to maintain my positive attitude that was wearing thin very fast. There was something about this place that made me feel distinctly on edge, but I couldn't decide what it was. I had dreamed of staying in a place like this all my life, but now that I was standing here in the cold light of day, surveying our immediate surroundings, along with the stunningly exquisite stained-glass arch windows, and the fire of my blazing enthusiasm had significantly dimmed.
My husband nodded. A cup of tea would go down very well. I do fancy a brew. Anything to warm us up. This place is as cold as a morgue.
Oh, please don't say that. You're giving me the creeps. I don't want to be thinking about places like that. Not when we're supposed to be on holiday.
I'm sorry, Skye, but I'm going to say it as it is. This place gives me the creeps, said my husband, shuddering. Have you noticed it could do with a good old dusting? There are cobwebs everywhere. I don't understand why the place wasn't cleaned before our arrival. It is very odd.
I nodded. It is peculiar.
You know why I think the place wasn't dusted, he reflected soberly. Why? Because Jenna doesn't really live here at all.
Well, why? Why would you say that? How could you possibly know?
Think about it, sweetheart. This place doesn't have a lived-in feeling about it that suggests a couple lives here. It's kitted out for people to stay here for the standard weekend or a few days. I don't think that couple lives here at all. There would be more evidence, surely. Knickknacks, magazines, odds and ends, rather like fridge magnets on the refrigerator and cards. But there's none of that stuff here. Nothing at all. Everything is basic, with your standard run-of-the-mill equipment. No personal touches to this home that even reflect the character of the owners. If you walk into our home, for example, you can see we love animals. There are signs of our love for animals everywhere, from the dog baskets to the portrait on our wall of Rufus with a bone in his mouth. Then there's our love for art, along with some of your watercolours you painted. But here, there's none of those personal touches. Nothing.
But she told me she lived here, I protested. Maybe they're minimalistic.
Or maybe she was being economical with the truth when she told you she lived here. Some of the dust is so thick you could practically write your name in it. It's not normal not to dust your house for months at a time. Besides, if you lived here full time, you would be disturbing that dust.
My husband was silent for a moment.
There's another thing about this place I discovered when I looked outside the bedroom window, when I was putting our suitcases down. I don't know how to tell you this, he said, pausing for a moment, as if he was wrestling with revealing something to me that potentially would really upset me. He began to run his hands backwards and forwards through his mane of dark hair, something he always did when he was stressed out or a little anxious. Seeing him behave like this made me all the more nervous. I began to tremble. My heart thundered in my chest. I instinctively sensed he had something bad to tell me. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what he had to say. Ignorance was bliss. I was already not comfortable in this place. What was he going to tell me? I might as well hear it now, or I would be wondering what it was, and that would be more bothersome to me. You're not going to like it one bit, my husband said, eyeing me warily through earnest eyes.
I don't care. Tell me. Don't leave me champing at the bit.
Well, there's a graveyard behind our bedroom.
There's a what? I gasped.
There's a graveyard behind our bedroom.
I stared at my husband as if he was speaking some strange foreign language that I couldn't comprehend. You're joking. That can't be right. No one would have a graveyard in the back of their property, would they? That's crazy.
Not necessarily. It goes with the territory. You can't just go digging up graves when you buy a property, except in extreme circumstances. Given this is a chapel that was once a church, it stands to reason that there would be a graveyard here. Besides, I thought you found graveyards rather interesting."
I did find graveyards interesting, but that does not mean I want to be sleeping in one. Lachlan knew I'd had a bad experience in an old graveyard in Scotland once when I was 15 years old. The haunting experience had freaked me out. It was something that I'd never ever forgotten. The gruesome memory still haunted me to this very day. Every time I saw a grave, it would send cold shivers down my spine. You of all people should know, Lachlan, that outer-worldly, unearthly things happen in graveyards. I shuddered as the haunting, vexatious memories of myself as a young girl of 15 years old, visiting a graveyard in an old Scottish cemetery in the dead of night, came rushing back to me with a freshness and vivid recall, as if it had happened yesterday. This was an irksome memory that I'd willfully tried to expunge from my mind, but it would come bouncing back like the proverbial jack-in-the-box again and again and again. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the harrowing experience in a tauntingly graphically detailed nightmare. Like most of the 15-year-old girls in my year, we had loved stories about things that go bump in the night. Horror movies had always given us that spine-chilling, delightful, tingling thrill that we hankered after at such a young age. It had enthralled and intoxicated us, being driven to the end of our terror, like a derailed train hanging on the precipice of a cliff face. It was as blood-tingling for us as taking a ride on a roller coaster, possibly even more inspiriting. That disquieting night in Scotland had been the most terrifying night of our young lives. Of course, we'd lied to our parents, as 15-year-olds invariably do. We claimed that the 5 of us girls were going to an all-night sleepover with a friend. That was true. What no one knew was that my friend lived across the road from a large cemetery, which we intended to visit in the dead of night, in our tireless search for a hair-raising ghostly encounter. Be careful what you wish for it might just come true. I shivered as I recalled the chilling event. It must have been about 20 to 12 in the evening. We had cautiously slipped out of the back window of my friend Abby's bedroom, so as not to be heard by her strict draconian mother, who would have possibly done her nut if she'd discovered what we were up to. Well, that's an understatement, actually. She would have done more than her nut. She would have been totally incensed. But what she didn't know would never hurt her. Abby's mother, Mrs. McKeith, was the bossiest, most dominating and overbearing woman you could ever hope to meet, who was very religious and vehemently believed you didn't go tampering with things you didn't understand. That night all 5 of us girls carried torches in our hands, along with impassioned excitement in our hearts. We were snugly wrapped up in warm clothes, as it was a chilly night. I recall we were all wearing jeans, sweatshirts and thick anoraks. I had felt exhilarated being out in the fresh, crisp, breezy night like this. It had been dark, oppressive, even menacing, but that was the whole idea, wasn't it? We were seeking an adventurous thrill. I'd never forgotten that. Where were the stars and moon that night? They seemed vanquished from the sky. But as far as I was concerned, I didn't care. I wanted to be scared out of my skull. We all did, without exception. I was desirous to experience the same gripping thrill you acquired from those scary movies where you ate popcorn and drank soda pop at the cinema, and writhed in your seats in terror, screaming your lungs out or clutching each other in hair-raising scenes. What I was soon to realise is that reality and fiction are worlds apart. I'm afraid real fear is not so grippingly thrilling at all by any manner of means, not when you're caught up in its mist. The 5 of us girls exuberantly ambled over to the cemetery, with a vibrant skip in our step. We approached the vast iron black gates, surreptitiously pushing them open. They creaked. We giggled as we trudged down the asphalt road that meandered in straight lines around vast verdant manicured fields, bespeckled with gravestones in every shape and size, some so old they were crooked, bent over, dilapidated, swathed in moss and lichen, names worn away by time. "What do we do now?" asked my friend Esther, once we were in the graveyard. "How do we get the ghost and ghoulies to come out?" she teased. At that we all giggled. 2 of my friends pulled out cigarettes from their pockets and started to smoke, while Abby pulled out some brandy she'd pinched from her father's cabinet and began to take a swig. "Anyone want some brandy?" she asked. I took a swig. The strong alcohol burned the back of my throat. We decided to walk around the graveyard to study the stones. We curiously read several of the stone inscriptions, then sat around a gravestone to talk in the way that young girls invariably do. It would seem the subject had veered off ghosts. Now we were discussing boys. I think we were feeling a wee bit disappointed, rather flat like sparkling champagne that had lost its fizz. Perhaps all these scary movies are overrated, I thought. Nothing really sinister happens in a graveyard after all. We'd hyped ourselves up for nothing. Still, it was fun to be out here in the middle of the night, doing something we knew we shouldn't. It always felt good to be defying the parents' rules. As like typical obstreperous teenagers, we were naturally rebellious, sometimes even mutinous when it came to our parents' rules, as we tested the water and pushed those quintessential boundaries. As we were standing over a gravestone, that was when we saw him. He looked exceedingly angry as he marched deliberately towards us, swinging his arms backwards and forwards defiantly. We sensed this must be the caretaker of the graveyard. He didn't look at all happy with us. On the contrary, he looked incandescent. His weathered, wrinkled face looked contorted, his cold eyes grim and hostile, his mouth twisted down in a large scowl. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest. I knew we were in big trouble. This was a privately owned cemetery. We were trespassing. Bloody hell, said my friend Kirsty, stabbing out her cigarette quickly, as she saw the peaked man moving towards us at a hasty speed, his rapid movements displaying the level of his affronted rage. He appeared to be gnashing his teeth, he was so peeved. You could feel the pugnacious, bristly energy as he loomed ever closer towards us. "What are you girls doing here?" the cantankerous man ranted. "This is a private cemetery. I can see you're smoking and drinking. Do you have no respect for the dead?" I remember his dark, belligerent eyes were burning with indignation as he studied us vengefully. There was something off about him, but I couldn't fathom what it was. He was wearing a long black coat. His acrid face was unusually white. "I'm sorry, sir," stammered Kirsty. "We'll get out of here. We were only having a bit of fun. We didn't mean any harm. We weren't being disrespectful. We really weren't, I promise." "Only a bit of fun, young lady. Do you realise how much work it takes to keep this graveyard in tip-top shape and pristine condition?" "I said we were sorry, sir," said Kirsten, stammering. "We'll go now. We're really sorry, sir." I'd been evading looking at the man's eyes in my shame and humiliation. It was so awful to be caught out like this. It hadn't occurred to me that there would be a caretaker on night duty. That prospect hadn't even dawned on us. That was when my eyes glanced at the man's feet. But he had none. His body ended at the end of his coat. What the heck was going on? The man that was standing here talking to us had no feet. But that was impossible. You couldn't stand with no feet. Nobody could. That was when it hit me like a brick to my head. This impassioned man that had approached us was an apparition. This realization turned my blood cold. I let out a shrill scream that startled my friends. With desperate hands, I pushed past them. I began running for my life, virtually galloping down the asphalt road. Did my friends not realize we were talking to a ghost? Kirsty apologized to the man for my absurd behavior, but amidst her apology, the man began to grow faint before her. Then he vanished, dematerializing before their eyes. My 4 friends began to scream. They, too, started to run behind me on the asphalt road, desperate to leave the cemetery, to get back home as quickly as they could. As I was running away, I felt a cold hand touching my back. It was so bitterly cold that it actually burnt me, almost as if I'd touched a hot iron with my bare hands. I screamed again. I do not even know how all 5 of us girls actually made it back to the house that night, as we all began fighting each other, wiggling through the bedroom as fast as we could, our hearts thundering through our chests, our breath almost faint. I remember we put the light on in the bedroom. Finally, Abby broke the awkward silence. "We just saw a ghost! Oh my God! We bloody saw a ghost! He actually spoke to us! I can't believe this happened! This really happened!" None of us could. It seemed so surreal. The next day I was to discover a dark handprint had been seared on my back like a burn. It took 2 weeks before it faded away and was gone. Needless to say, we found out who the man was we encountered. He was a caretaker for that graveyard in 1884. We found a portrait of him online. It sent chills down our spine. A week later, my friend's mother woke up to find the caretaker standing at the end of her bed. Like us, she thought he was real, that someone had broken into the house. He looked at her and said, "Stay away," and then he vanished before us.
Of course we knew that stay away was for us, but luckily my friend's mother never knew that. Needless to say, we never frequented that graveyard ever again, but we weren't the first to encounter the caretaker, nor would we be the last. I'm still convinced he haunts that graveyard, guarding the graves of the departed, scaring anyone off who chooses to vandalise or explore the yard, or anyone who dares to offend the dearly departed by smoking or drinking in that graveyard. Now that me and Lachlan were staying here in a chapel in the middle of a graveyard, I felt more than a little unhinged, as I knew ghosts were real. The last thing I wanted was to experience an unearthly encounter all over again. Meeting that contentious caretaker had been more than enough interaction with the paranormal to last a lifetime. "I'm sorry, I know you have a thing about graveyards," said Lachlan, "but I'm sure we'll be perfectly all right here. I've just looked at the weather report. It's not looking good. The snowfall in around this area has been very hectic. Parts of the interstate have been cut off. There's been reports of snowdrifts everywhere. They're advising people to stay indoors, not to travel. There's ice on many of the roads. There have been some serious accidents." "Oh dear," I sighed. "So we're more or less trapped. Whatever induced me to think that staying in a Gothic chapel in winter would be a good idea? I must have lost leave of my senses." "Never you mind. We're going to make the most of our time here. It's going to be fun, I promise you," said Lachlan, trying to sound reassuring. "But what about the graveyard?"
"Forget the graveyard. It's going to be fine. Just because you say you had a bad experience in a graveyard once does not mean it'll happen again. In my book, lightning doesn't strike in the same place twice."
"I hope you're right," I said, not looking terribly encouraged by my husband's reassuring words, but I did manage a wry smile. Part 2. I'm glad to inform you that for the next couple of days they were very uneventful. I wasn't about to complain about that at all. I was exceedingly happy with the routine monotony. I hoped that things would stay as humdrum as possible. We were pretty much snowed in, as the weather was unrelenting in its disregard for our comfort, as the incessant snow continued to fall. The ravages of the panelling winds hammered and beat against the chapel, so that it rattled and almost shook like a boat out on a tempestuous, turbulent, unsettled sea. I didn't even want to brave the elements or go out of doors, for if I so much as opened the door, the wailing wind would literally throttle me with its hands, almost lifting me off my feet and blowing me away. It certainly didn't help that it was bitterly cold out there, searing bone to marrow, making the very idea of going outdoors about as appealing as eating a sheep's eyeballs. I know that in some cultures eating sheep's eyeballs are considered a delicacy, but most certainly not for me. In my eyes, they're absolutely revolting. Let's just say such weather is an acquired taste. It certainly wasn't for me. I was used to bad weather, living in Scotland, but this boisterous, raging storm was one of a kind, and it wasn't for the faint-hearted. So me and Lachlan made the most of reading books together. Thankfully, there was a vast selection of good fiction in the bookshelves, which was our saving grace. We were both prolific readers, so we curled up happily on the sofas by a crackling fire and made ourselves as comfortable as possible, eating hot meals, drinking copious amounts of hot beverages. So much for the chapel being a romantic place. It was anything but. It was so bitterly cold and oppressive, not what you'd expect from a place of God. I think all these beautiful stained glass windows, as lovely as they are, did not provide the same kind of protection against the elements like double glazing clearly would have done. It was on the third day when the windy weather had laconically subsided, taking a brief respite. It would seem the raging storm had a contrary mind all of its own. It wasn't intending on calming down its aggressive stance any time soon, but it appeared to be taking a moment's breather from the hammering, pounding air, rather like a celestial vacuum cleaner, as if the windy Hoover extension had been switched off at the mains, disabling its electric connection for a while. I was standing by the kitchen sink washing the dishes, my hands thoroughly enjoying the warmth of the soap suds, as I wiped the soaked dishes thoroughly clean with a scouring brush. Suddenly, as I was glancing out of the window, I saw a large, solid flash of black moving swiftly past me, looking in at me. Was I mistaken? I couldn't be sure. Had I actually seen that? Had I actually seen anything at all? Surely not. "I'm going out for a second," I told Lachlan, throwing the scouring brush back into the soapy water. I scurried hastily towards the entrance hall, quickly grabbing my anorak off the hook, throwing on my boots.
Are you sure that's a good idea, sweetheart? I could hear my husband saying, but his words dissipated like the steam from a kettle, as I'd long since opened the door, courageously embracing the elements, as an icy, bracing chill numbed my skin. But at the very least the evanescent spirited winds had been sagaciously abated, for the time being at least. Enough time, I hoped, to do a little investigating and exploring of my own, to appease a rather inquiring mind that was excitedly doing flip-flops in eager anticipation of my search. I was now outside, staring in awesome wonder at the smooth, untarnished, immaculate white wilderness before me, that was so transfixing in its breathtaking beauty. It was so pristine, only disturbed by this long trail of Herculean-sized cookie-cutter-like footprint depressions that had gouged out their vast shape in the snow. I gawked in astonishment as I studied them. I mean, who in the world has feet this large? Furthermore, who walks in the ice-cold snow in their bare feet? I could see pronounced toe-mark indentations, which ruled out the possibility that the flash of black I'd seen only moments before in the kitchen was a bear. It most certainly was not. Bears do not have toes. I made a foot impression of my own next to the print. I was absolutely astonished to see how tiny my footprint seemed by contrast. I now knew unequivocally that I'd definitely seen something outside the kitchen window. But what it was, that was the baffling, mysterious question. Whatever it was, I knew it was profoundly real. I was exceedingly inquisitive. Fear was not even engaged in my thinking, not at all. On the contrary, I was absolutely fascinated, exceedingly intrigued by what I'd seen. I resolutely resolved to follow the footsteps. I wanted to see where they would lead. I was to realize whatever this thing was that I was following most certainly had monstrous 5-foot strides, so it must be titanic in its proportions. I mean, who in the world walks with such a large stride? No one I knew. The mysterious, enigmatic footsteps led through a long line of Douglas fir trees, so I cautiously stepped up my speed, as my feet treaded prudently through the thick snow, meandering judiciously through the trees. Their boughs were heavily draped by thick overlays of glistening snow. There in the woodgrove I could see a large igloo-like shelter, made out of clusters of timber, needled branches, green offshoots, bracken, pieces of hedgerow, briars, and hay, cemented skilfully together with heavy bricks of snow. It was built up masterfully against a rocky outcrop, so that it blended uniformly with the rocks. Indeed, it was so meticulously camouflaged by snow, so irreproachable, that I probably wouldn't have seen it at all, if the giveaway footsteps had not been so conspicuous. Whoever was living inside the igloo had made only one blunderous gaffe, and that was not brushing its footsteps away. If the creature, whatever it was, had surreptitiously covered its tracks, I would never ever have uncovered its hiding spot in a million years. Not a chance. That was how indefectibly concealed it was. Suffice to say, to be fair to the creature, this was a remote, uninhabited part of the world. If the creature did think someone was staying in the chapel, if by any chance it might have seen me, it would possibly wisely conclude that no one would foolishly brave the elements like I had done, as most people would be a whole lot more sensible and circumspect than I was. But then I wasn't most people. By nature I was spontaneously impulsive, sometimes to my gross detriment. I hoped that this would not be the case in this situation. This was certainly not the kind of arbitrary storm you played around with for fun. It was reckless and unpredictable. I stood there for a moment, my eyes fixed on the shelter, wondering what I should do. I wanted to see what was inside that igloo, more than anything in the entire world. It was like I had an audacious itch I desperately needed to scratch. I was voraciously impatient to know what I'd seen, but also I had enough sense to know that whoever was occupying that shelter could potentially be dangerous. Let's just say I didn't think about that possibility too much, as it would have robbed me of the confidence to do what I did next. This was when I had a stroke of genius. Well, so I thought at the time, but on reflection I'm not so sure my actions were that sagacious. I decided I would throw something at the structure, to see if I could get the creature to come out. But I would hide in the shadows so that it would never see me. I mean, honestly, who on earth was I kidding? I can't believe the level of my naivety. But there you go, Rome wasn't built in a day. I rolled a substantial amount of snow up into a sizable ball, gingerly throwing it at the igloo.
It hit the corner of the structure, making a loud crashing sound, as the snow dissipated, as it hit the edges of the igloo. I stood very still, my heart beating a little faster. I took a deep breath, peeking behind the trees like a mischievous school kid, waiting for some kind of reaction. But nothing happened. I tried again. Once again I rolled up the snow into a large snowball, hurling it vigorously, swinging my arms as hard as I could for maximum impact. Surely it would be a distinguishable sound, as the howling winds had stopped. Some of the snow broke apart. It went flying into the opening, making a violent banging sound as it hit the ground. Nothing was to prepare me for what I was to see next. In truth, I don't even know what I was expecting to see. I heard a distinctive rustling noise as something was shuffling around in that igloo. Then a dense, black, shadowy, solid form began to crawl out of the structure, on hands and knees, rising to its feet. I audibly gasped. What in God's name was this creature? I'd never seen anything like it before. It stood up proud and tall like a man, at about 8 foot 700 pounds. Its lofty, dense, burly silhouette was covered in long flowing hair, the colour of black coal, that was so pronounced against the white snow. The thing that captivated my scrutiny and hijacked my attention with an extreme sense of bewilderment was how human the face of this creature appeared to be, along with a human-shaped body, a pair of small pert breasts, human hands and feet, although the arms on the creature were overlong, and the head was a pyramid shape. I was dumbfounded by what I was perceiving. I just stared at this creature in wondrous awe, hoping that she would not see me hiding there behind the tree. I had, of course, underestimated the intelligence and cunning discernment of this creature. To my immense amazement, the creature's eyes spun around like a needle on a magnet, priming in on my exact location with a pinpoint accuracy. I tried to remain terribly still. My body began to tremble and wobble like a jelly. I think it was knowing that she had seen me that sent the fear of God passing through my veins. My heart began to crash around in my chest like a gibbering idiot. Oh my God, she'd seen me, or at the very least she knew exactly where I was. I hadn't anticipated this. I knew the creature was exceedingly intimidating. I'd seen her. She was powerful, majestic, huge. If she became remotely violent towards me, I was as good as dead. Should I run? Should I stay very still? I couldn't decide what course of action to initiate. The creature seized that decision from me, as she graciously glided towards the tree where I was hiding. She stood yards away from me, her eyes looking into mine. For a long while we just stared at each other. I think she was trying to comprehend what the heck I was doing out in this weather. Suffice to say, there was nothing malicious or hostile about the creature, which did surprise me. On the contrary, her eyes were terribly kind, but they did register a deep concern. I realized she was exceedingly worried about me, being caught out in the storm. She was right. Suddenly the weather that had calmed down for a brief interlude while I'd ventured out of doors all but shifted, renewing its viciously hostile and fierce advance, as sheets of icy cold air began to blast against me. I turned around to move towards the chapel. I knew I'd better be getting back, or I would be caught up in this feisty storm that was gathering wind speed at a rapid impetus. The creature stood very still, watching me, but she could see I was struggling. I've never known howling gale-force winds like this before. They beat against me like a boxer's pounding fist so rigorously that I fell backwards onto the ground, clambering furiously back onto my hands and feet, as if wrestling with an invisible man. I was being thrust backwards by forceful, commanding hands that barricaded my path back to the house. What the hell did I think I was doing, embracing the elements like this? Did I have a death wish or something? I was absolutely freezing. The wind was blowing up streams of icy debris across the escarpment, like a rambunctious, deadly sandstorm. The cold was biting, my body aching, while the fingers on my hands were frigid and stiff in my gloves. My eyes barely able to see, as the whistling wind blasted icy particles into them, so that they began to water profusely. I turned around to see the creature still standing there, her body solid and firm like a powerful sakura tree, unmoved, unstirred, unaffected by the cruel weather, with her well-grounded, powerful legs rooted securely to the earth by the foundations of her brute strength. She was watching me in bewilderment. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her deep-set dark eyes,
as if she was pondering whether she should help me or not. Then she was there at my side. I could feel her breath on my face. She looked directly into my eyes. I heard the words in my head, "Let me help you." The next thing I knew was she lifted me into her overlong arms, carrying me directly towards the chapel like a baby. She was so powerfully strong that she moved like the wind and wasn't held back in any way. I could feel the rise and fall of her heartbeat as my head was cradled against her chest. Finally she put me down outside the door. Then she stood still as though waiting. I looked at her and said, "Thank you." The creature watched me open the door, then, satisfied that I was safe inside the chapel, glided away, looking back only once to give me a brief congenial nod. It was only when I returned to Scotland after doing some intense research that I discovered the kind creature that had helped me was known as a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. I quickly dashed into the chapel. My husband by now was fast asleep by the fire, with an Agatha Christie book clasped in his hands. He looked up at me as I stared at him, with a transfixed expression on my face. "What the heck is wrong with you?" asked Lachlan. "You look like you've swallowed a goldfish." "I may well have done," I said. "You'll never believe what happened to me out there. A strange, hairy creature carried me back to the house, as the storm was so fearsome. She was so nice, covered in hair. She looked human." Lachlan looked at me as if he thought I'd lost my mind, so I decided to quit while I was ahead. How could I possibly explain something so anomalous like this? If I couldn't make sense of what I'd encountered, how could he? It would be like saying, "Oh, by the way, I've just encountered a fairy." My story would seem nonsensical and outer-worldly to him. "What are you talking about? What did you say you saw?" "Oh, it was nothing," I said. "I must have seen a bear," I lied. Of course, I wish my story about staying at the chapel would end there, but it didn't. It was on the 4th night of our stay that I woke up with an inauspicious, portentous feeling that I wasn't alone. I felt as if something was watching me while I lay in my bed, but there was nothing there. I told myself I was going stark raving mad. My heart thumped in my chest, but I managed to calm myself down. I pulled the duvet cover over my head, trying desperately to sleep, but my eyes remained wide open. Maybe I should have woken Lachlan up, I thought, but then if I woke him up, he'd think I was losing my mind, so I decided better against it. Besides, he was notoriously grumpy if I woke him up prematurely. Telling him that I thought we weren't alone in my bedroom would likely facilitate a petty squabble between us, where I would be informed that my imagination was overactive. How I managed to drift off to sleep I don't know, but I did. Then I felt someone nudging me, as if they were tapping me. They kept calling my name. It sounded like a woman's voice. "Sky, Sky, Sky." I woke up with a start, but when I looked around the bedroom there was no one there. That was when I saw an indentation form at the end of my bed. I screamed. Lachlan woke up. "What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you screaming?" "There's someone in here," I trembled, pointing towards the end of my bed, my eyes round with terror. "Lachlan, I promise you it was a woman's voice. She called my name. Look, there's an indentation at the end of my bed. Can't you see it? I promise you she was sitting over there. The duvet was straight before. Now there's a definite imprint. It happened before my eyes, Lachlan. I promise you I'm not making this up." Lachlan rolled his eyes in frustration, as if he didn't believe a word I was saying. "You're very impressionable, Sky. I'm sure it's nothing. You're just imagining things. Ever since you learnt about the graveyard behind us, you've allowed your mind to play tricks on you." Lachlan could say what he liked, but I knew what I'd seen. It freaked me out. I do not know how I managed to fall asleep, but I did. Lachlan's account. From the very beginning I wasn't exactly thrilled to be going to stay in a chapel. I was eager to visit America, of course I was, but I never envisaged my first taste of this grand, remarkable, illustrious country would be staying in a Gothic chapel of all things. I mean, who does that? Isn't that an absurd choice of accommodation? But my wife has always been unorthodox. I knew me and my wife needed a break, so when she became excited about this house swap online, I didn't want to disappoint her by erring on the side of caution, which I wish I had. Sky has always been impulsive, a hopeless utopian romantic. For her, the idea of staying in a chapel with stained-glass windows and a bell tower titillated all her fancies and dreams. I mean, who was I to rob her of this whimsical, enchanting ambition of hers? So I decided to go along with the preposterous, rather loopy idea.
Isn't that what husbands do to appease their wives? Sometimes make less than desirable sacrifices on their accounts, or to keep the peace. After all, don't they say happy wife, happy life? I've always embraced that theory. It's worked in my marriage. What I never knew was that we would end up pretty much snowed in when we arrived at our destination, facing the most dreadful, harrowing storming conditions, where we would hear the wind howling outside the chapel for days at a time, as everything rattled and shook precariously. Worse still, we were staying at a place that sent a chill down my spine. It was unnaturally cold all the time. I always had the impression we were being watched. I don't know how to describe it to you, but the place had a baleful, foreboding ambience. Of course, I didn't want to show Skye I had my reservations, as it would have spoilt the mood of our holiday. I did tell her I found the place rather sinister. Needless to say, I decided to adopt a positive, upbeat attitude about our stay. There was no point in becoming woebegone or disillusioned. We had to make the most of a bad situation. Ostensibly, when I discovered that there was a graveyard in the backyard, it certainly didn't ingratiate me towards the place. I didn't want to tell Skye about my macabre discovery, as I knew such a revelation to her would go down like a lead balloon, but I had to tell her. I could see her blue eyes fill with fear. Skye had a ghostly encounter when she was 15 years old in a cemetery in Scotland. If she had the slightest inkling that there were gravestones around this chapel, wild horses could not have dragged her to stay in this place. It was a hostile place, as if something or someone didn't want us here. Sometimes a place can give off that menacing ambience that instinctively warns you that something's not quite right. Then there was the curious question of the house dust and cobwebs. I certainly didn't get the impression that this house had been lived in for quite a while. I believe our hosts had been more than a little economical with the truth. As to why that was the case, I wasn't entirely sure. It was on night 4 when my wife woke up screaming. She was totally convinced that there was someone in the bedroom with us. She said she'd heard a disembodied woman's voice whisper out her name. She pointed to the area of her bed, where there was a deep indentation on the mattress. What I didn't tell my wife was that a woman had also whispered my name in my ear, but this was on night 3, so I was fully aware that we weren't alone in this chapel. I just hoped that the ghost, whoever she was, would leave us alone. But I made a classic mistake. I told my wife that there were no such thing as ghosts, that once the dead were dead, they were truly gone. I told her that the dead could not interact with the living, and that the hollow indentation at the end of her bed was possibly made by us. Of course, my wife knew I was talking through my backside. She knew from personal experience that a person can indeed interact with a ghost, as it had happened to her with 4 of her friends back in Scotland. What I didn't realise was that I'd inadvertently almost challenged the ghost to interact with us. I was saying, "You're not real. You don't even exist." Believe me, that was a monumental mistake on my part. So things got very interesting for us on night 5, when the female apparition was determined to make herself known, so that her presence in the chapel could not be denied or disregarded any more. "I'm so scared," my wife said to me when we retired to bed that evening. "I'm scared that ghostly woman will come back." "Don't be ridiculous. She doesn't exist, Skye. She's not real." "I think she comes from the graveyard in the back," my wife persisted. "I don't even think. I know it. But why is she bothering us? What does she want? I mean, the caretaker at the cemetery in Scotland believed he was taking care of the cemetery in death. But what does this woman want with us? Why was she calling my name last night? That's what I want to know. What does she want with me?" "Calm down, Skye. You had a bad experience in a cemetery once. You're allowing your personal demons to torment you." "I wish we could leave this place," she said, shuddering. "When is this bloody storm going to stop? Then we can book into a hotel or something. This place gives me the creeps. I feel as if we're being watched all the time. Worse than that, I feel as if we're being scrutinized. I feel that whoever is watching us doesn't want us here." "You're just letting your imagination run away with you, Skye." "Well, I'm sorry, Lachlan, but I'm going to sleep with my bedside light on tonight. I'm not going to sleep in the dark. I refuse to." "Be my guest," I said, throwing the covers over my head. "Now let's get some sleep." We could hear the wind outside battering the chapel. Everything rattled and shook. But eventually I fell into a deep sleep, as over the last few days we had acclimatized to the noise. I was awoken to hear my name being whispered. "Lachlan! Lachlan!" came a woman's voice, but I ignored it. I stayed still, squeezing my eyelids tightly, while my heart thumped loudly in my chest.
Even my palms began to sweat. That was when I felt something nudging me. I thought it was my wife, so I sat up. "What is it, Sky?" I groaned. And that was when I saw a grey swirling mist circulating at the end of my bed, beginning to take shape. At first it became like a black shadow that thickened, became foggy and dense. Then it was as if details began to develop on the shadow, until it morphed into a grotesquely ugly woman in a black dress, standing at the edge of my bed, staring down at me through vacuous eyes. She gave me a provocative, toothless grin, very vindictive. I sensed she wanted to show me that she was there and that she was real. I gasped, then she dematerialized before my eyes, but I nearly jumped out of my skin when I physically heard the clip-clop of her shoes walking to the side of my bed. I could sense she had stopped yards away from me. I could hear and feel her presence. Now I began to breathe very fast. I felt her standing next to me, but I saw nothing there. Then I heard her voice screaming in my ear, "Get out! Get out! Get out now!" I could see my wife's bedside lamp was off, as there had been a power cut, but now it began to flicker on and off simultaneously. "Sky! Sky! Wake up!" "What's the matter?" she asked, studying me curiously. "You look as if you've seen a ghost. Don't tell me you have. Your face is as white as a sheet. You're trembling. What's wrong?" I was hardly going to tell my wife I'd seen a ghost. That would only affirm her worst fears, give her cause to overreact. One thing I certainly knew was I wanted to get going, to leave this place. I didn't know what this ghost was capable of doing. I didn't want to stand around and find out. I no longer cared about the storm out there. It seemed so much less worse than what was inside the chapel. I wanted out of this place as fast as possible, and there was no time like the present. "We're leaving now," I said. "Grab all your stuff. We're going." "But why?" gasped my wife. "What about the storm? It's so dangerous out there. You heard what they were saying on the radio. Some of the roads are still not safe. Why all the sudden change of mind?" "I don't give a stuff about the storm. Get your stuff. We're going now." Jenna Hudson's account. I'm not going to lie. What's the point in doing that? Of course I had been lying online to Sky McNally. I told her we lived in a chapel near Mount Rainier. We did. But it wasn't entirely true, as we no longer physically lived there. But I thought it would be best to be economical with the truth. If I told Sky why I wasn't living in the chapel any more with my husband, then she would be unlikely to engage in the house swap with us. I didn't want that to happen. It was a dream of mine to go to Scotland. I'd been told it was one of the most beautiful countries in the world to visit. When Sky told me about her idyllic, whimsical stone cottage in the Scottish Highlands, I just knew I wanted to stay there, so it was a no-brainer for me. I couldn't resist. I knew Scotland was the land of castles and lochs, Scottish myths, legends and fables. If there was any place in the entire world where you were likely to encounter a haunting, it would be a country like Scotland, surely. So maybe, just maybe, the couple had encountered a ghost at one stage. I didn't want to tell them there was a ghost at the chapel, of an angry woman, a woman who didn't want us there, a woman who would throw a hissy fit if anyone stayed at the chapel. That was the real reason me and my husband Walter had abandoned the place. We were now living in Seattle with Walter's parents, getting under their skin. So the idea of a to-escape in Scotland became infinitely more appealing to us, even if it was during an unseasonable time of the year. When I told Sky McNally we were kindred spirits, I wasn't lying either. I'd also been excited when the chapel near Mount Rainier came on the market. It was my idea to convert it into a home that practically oozed an illustrious history. Of course my husband thought it was an insane, preposterous idea, but I managed to persuade him that the chapel was a sound investment. One thing that did bother me greatly was the graveyard at the back of the property, but somehow I persuaded myself it was nothing to concern myself about. After all, it only added to the charm and sentimentality of the place. The little chapel had been erected in 1906 by a woman called Florence, who was eager to introduce the locals in the area to a Christian faith. But it was her spiteful, malicious sister Constance who had filibustered all her sister's dreams due to an intense sibling rivalry and a touch of the green-eyed monster. Professedly, it was a classic Cinderella story, where Florence had been subjected to abuse by a begrudging stepmother who despised Florence, who was stunningly beautiful as a woman, with a heart of an angel.
As far as anyone knows, there was a plethora of eager men seeking her hand in marriage, many who were men of sizable means, who could offer Florence a very upper-class standard of living, where she could escape the mediocrity of her lower middle-class life. Florence refused all their gallant proposals, preferring to live a sacrificial life. She was a woman of great faith, believing she was on a mission to spread the good news of the gospel of God's grace. Without doubt she punnelled all her energy in her mission work, where she worked with a minister, a man called Douglas Wilder, who was the man responsible for building the chapel. It is to be presumed that her invidious sister sabotaged everything that Florence and Douglas did together. In every regard she was jealous of her sister. Constance had never had a marriage proposal a day in her life. It was believed that she physically vandalized her sister's chapel over and over again, while undermining her sister's efforts to grow the chapel's congregation, by spreading vindictive lies, false rumours and nasty gossip about her sister, and also about the minister Douglas Wilder, in order to destroy their generous reputations, incapacitating their ability to do good for the community. Unfortunately, Florence died prematurely from a bout of pneumonia, so her dreams in regards to her mission project were never fully realised or completed. To all intents and purposes, soon afterwards her sister Constance died as well, having caught Florence's raging infection. Maybe divine justice intervened after all. It goes without saying that Constance died a bitter, twisted, angry woman. It would appear that both sisters are buried in the graveyard, but I believe it is Constance who haunts the place to this day, trying to drive people away from the chapel, as she did in life, to extract her ultimate revenge on her sister, which was why we encountered her wrath when we moved into the chapel. Of course we knew nothing about the chapel's history when my husband and I purchased the place. I remember being incredibly excited the first time I laid eyes on the chapel. I fell hopelessly in love with it. I knew that I had to have it. Needless to say, my husband Walter did not share my enthusiasm. He wasn't eager to go through with the purchase, but I can be persuasive if needs must. I dreamed of transforming a church building into a sumptuous, cosy home. He said the place gave him the chills. I thought he was being absolutely ridiculous. You see, Walter's not the kind of man that appreciates homes steeped in a rich, vibrant history. It's not to say he doesn't understand the beauty of a historic building, but he'd rather not live in one. If indeed he had his way, I'm in no doubt he would be desirous to buy a modern contemporary home, with seamless glass finishes and plenty of granite. When we purchased the chapel, we hired a couple of builders to transform the interiors, while maintaining the chapel's integrity. The two builders we hired were more than a little eager to get the project finished, as they claimed they felt they were being watched all the time, that they could hear a woman coughing, but there was no one there. It rarely haunted them. They both said they felt as if something definitely didn't want them there. Up until then, I had never believed in paranormal stuff. In truth, I thought it was erroneous. I do remember one of the builders saying to me, "You're very brave, ma'am, to live in a home with a graveyard at the back." I didn't think it was any different to having a family plot, which is often the case in older family homes. Why would this be any different? I even said as much. He said to me, "But ma'am, there are about 70 graves in the back, all from the early 1900s. I honestly didn't know what he was on about. Besides, I thought the graveyard in the back added to the mystique of the place, made the place infinitely more interesting, as graveyards are always fascinating. I could see the others did not share my enthusiasm. Many of my guests who visited the chapel always commented that they wouldn't be comfortable to have a graveyard at the back of the property if they were wearing my shoes, but they weren't, were they? Why should I care what they thought? Once me and Walter moved into the chapel, we always felt as if we were being watched. I kept that feeling at bay, but Walter kept expressing his misgivings about the place. I think we were a bit impulsive buying the chapel, he would say. I get a sense something doesn't want us here. When we were asleep at night in the chapel, there were occasions we heard a woman coughing. I would be preparing a meal in the evenings, and we would often hear her coughing as well. Walter would say, "Did you cough?" I would say, "No, I didn't." He said I could swear I heard someone coughing. Even though I heard the cough, I pleaded ignorance, pretending I hadn't heard it. We began to hear a woman's shoes walking around the chapel at night. Then there were occasions we would see a shadowy form sitting in the pew, but I thought it had to be a trick of the light. I wanted to believe that. One day we were sitting eating dinner, and my glass of wine was flung from the table, shattered against the wall. I was trembling so much, I said to Walter, "Did you see that?" He nodded, his eyes were round, his face discomposed. He said, "I told you, I don't like this place." One day as I was casually strolling in the graveyard, it was the middle of the day, I saw the strange woman wearing a 1900s dress staring at me. I was wondering who she was and what she was doing in my backyard. She was wearing a frown on her face. But then she dematerialized before my very eyes. It was an airy, surreal feeling. In the weeks that followed, I'd see her shadowy form moving around the chapel. It gave me a cold chill. One night the power went off in our home for no explanation at all. We couldn't get an electric connection, which was exceedingly odd. We'd have to call an electrician out in the morning. So we put a few candles on around the house so that we could see our way clearly if we needed to get up to go to the cloakroom in the middle of the night. I awoke with a sudden start when I heard someone tapping urgently on the window. I cried out in horror when I saw this dark, shadowy silhouette standing outside, looking at me with troubled eyes. The creature seemed undaunted by me. It seemed eager to get my attention. It kept pointing towards the living room area of my home. I realized this creature outside in the backyard looking at me through the window pane was a Bigfoot. It was the scariest creature I've ever seen. This was when I smelt the smoke. I quickly ran towards my husband, shaking him wide awake. He was fast asleep. Hadn't he heard me cry out? We dashed into the living room area, were horrified to find that our settee and one of our rugs was on fire. My husband found the fire retardant foam. We managed to kill the flames. We heard a woman's disembodied laughter as we frantically tried to put out the blaze. Me and my husband had no idea how a Bigfoot knew that our house could potentially have gone down in flames. If that creature hadn't woken us up, I'm almost certain we would be dead, which was a very discomposing thought. My husband perceived that maybe the creature had a great sense of smell and could smell the smoke from far away, choosing to warn us about the danger we were in. We knew the candle falling over was no accident. It would have had to have been deliberately pushed over intentionally for a fire like that to break out. The next day when the electrician came to examine our electric box, for some unexplainable reason, the electricity came back on. It was incredulous. Me and my husband called a psychic around to the chapel. She was one of those people that draws pictures of what she sees. She was able to establish a connection with a malevolent ghost called Florence, who she claimed was haunting the chapel. Even in death, she was spewing hatred towards her sister Constance, driven by a vendetta to get everyone out of the chapel, which included me and Walter. She even admitted to tipping over the candle. I remember the psychic drew a picture of the ghostly lady. She was wearing a high-waisted fluted skirt and a puffed blouse. I knew it was the very same woman I had physically seen in the graveyard. She also made some inquiries, which is how we found out about the history of the place, which verified her findings about Constance's desire to ruin her sister Florence. Needless to say, after our tumultuous experience in the chapel, me and my husband chose to move out. The psychic assured me that she had got rid of the ghost of Constance, but she did say there were no guarantees that Constance might come back, a fact I wasn't willing to reveal to our house guest, I'm ashamed to admit. I must confess my husband wasn't best pleased with me when I did this house swap with Skye and Lachlan McNally. He told me that the least I could do was to warn them about the possibility that Constance might be haunting the chapel again, but I couldn't do it. To cut a long story short, after I returned from my incredible holiday in Scotland, Skye opened up to me about everything that had happened to her while staying at the chapel. I realised that the ghost of Constance was back. I couldn't believe it. I also learnt that the Bigfoot female who had warned us about the fire had escorted Skye back to the chapel in a feisty windstorm. Suffice to say, we got an offer on our chapel by a man who loves investigating the paranormal. He bought the haunted chapel from us, claiming that he's seen the ghost of the angry Constance several times. Good luck to him. I wouldn't want to be wearing his shoes, but he claims to love the place. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'd been married to my husband James for over 10 years, so I knew him like the back of my hand. Well, so I thought. But over the last 3 months he'd become increasingly on edge, deep in thought, wrapped up in a faraway world. It seemed like our marriage had taken a hard beating, as my brooding husband was so preoccupied that I hardly got a word in edgeways. He seemed so distracted all the time, as if his conscient mind was otherwise engaged. I might as well have been a fly on the wall, as that was how little attention he directed at me. I didn't take it personally. I knew it wasn't about me. My husband was insanely busy, assiduously hard at work. I had discerned his behaviour to be a little out of character recently. I'd seen how stressed he appeared. His brown eyes looked so haunted, highlighted by the dark circles that announced that sleep had eluded him for quite a while. I assumed he was exhausted, being overstretched by his boss Marcus Sutcliffe, as even after working hours he was tapping away incessantly at his mobile phone, claiming he was communicating with clients after hours, which seemed nonsensical. Sometimes he would still be busying himself on his cell phone in the middle of the night. I could see how worn out and frayed he seemed. It made my blood boil. I mean, the nerve of his boss. Did he not understand that my husband had the right to enjoy a personal life? If Marcus Sutcliffe wanted to work him into the ground, then at the very least he should be paying him overtime. I was about 6 months pregnant, suffering from a barrage of morning sickness, which would afflict me at any time of the day, morning or night. At the time we lived in Seattle, in a relatively decent green leafy neighbourhood, where we rented out a fully furnished, ultra-modern, contemporary semi-detached home. Life was very good. We were looking forward to the arrival of our new baby in 3 months. I was making plans to prepare a cute little nursery for my unborn child, whom I had recently learnt was a baby girl, that I was going to call Sienna. I'm not an interfering woman by any manner of means, nor do I like to interfere or meddle in my husband's affairs, but after seeing him in such a stressed-out state, I knew I invariably needed to do something about it. I couldn't sit back and watch him wearing himself into the ground like this. I knew my regular rendezvous at the trendy little coffee shop on 2nd Avenue was what was needed to get some sound advice from my sagacious friends. Here in Seattle we're big coffee enthusiasts. Seattle is a world centre for coffee drinking, so we pretty much consider ourselves connoisseurs when it comes to indulging in the rich, aromatic, high-caffeine beverage. "Oh, there she is at last," said my friend Erica, when I made my appearance at the quaint little coffee shop, with their nifty tables swathed in red and white checkered tablecloths clustered together in an alfresco French style, rather reminding me of the charming little coffee shops in Paris, with the flamboyant, warm, congenial uptown atmosphere. My two friends were seated cosily at a table for our weekly gathering. I enjoyed these little tete-a-tetes. I was holding my stomach awkwardly as I approached the table, ever grateful to sink into a seat, audibly sighing as my derriere rested on the comfortable upholstered chair. It was good to get my feet off the ground. "Are you all right, Sasha? You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." "More like my shoulders and my belly," I joked. "So what's troubling you? You look flustered. It's not good for the baby, you know, to be so stressed out like this," said Erica, looking rather concerned. "Do you know they say that babies can feel if a mother is strained?" I grabbed my stomach, holding it protectively. "It's a combination of things. It's nausea, and my incessant worrying about James." Erica raised a quizzical brow. "Why are you worried about James?" she asked. "If you must know, his boss is only piling on the work like there's no tomorrow. I've seen how exhausted and frazzled he's become, working the craziest, most unreasonable hours. It's ludicrous. If I had my way, I'd wring his boss's neck for working him like a donkey. Sometimes it seems like he's miles away. Other times he's peevish and crabby. He'll snap at me for no reason at all. You know what James is like. He's normally such a relaxed soul. Not these days. Something's really irking him." "That's not right. It's not healthy for you, nor for James or your unborn baby, to be living in such a pressurized environment," said Erica. "Has he spoken to his boss? Told him that he's a slave driver? It's not reasonable for him to be working at home." I sighed. You know how James is. He's very conscientious and driven, far too polite to ruffle his boss's feathers. I know he'll just grin and get on with it, but I can see he's worn to a frazzle. "Why don't you tell him you think your husband is burning the candle at both ends, that perhaps he might consider reducing the workload?" "You think I can do that?" I asked. I hardly want to come across as the intrusive, busybody, interfering wife, sticking my nose where it doesn't belong. "Do you know his boss?" Alicia asked me. "Of course I know him. I've been to a couple of formal work dinners with him and his wife Diane. They're a very nice couple, actually. My impression of Marcus is he's a decent person. He seemed terribly nice to me. I'm not sure in hindsight that he's so reasonable, given how hard he's working my husband." "Well, there you go then. You have an absolute right to approach him on friendly terms, as a dutiful, solicitous wife." You can tell him that you're increasingly worried about your husband's welfare, that his workload has become increasingly objectionable. I mean, what harm can it possibly do? I knew Alicia was absolutely right, so I swiftly made an appointment to see my husband's boss privately at 9:30 the following morning. I'd just have to hope the appointment would be very discreet, that my husband wouldn't receive wind of it. If he knew I was secretly going behind his back, arranging meetings with his boss, he would be more than a little humiliated. I knew my husband was not himself of late. I assured myself I only had his best interests at heart. I couldn't just sit back and watch him fall apart before my very eyes. The following morning I was ushered into Marcus Sutcliffe's reception area by his accommodating receptionist Liesl Gray, that recognised me instantly as James's wife.
Hello, Sasha. Oh, it's so great to see you. What are you doing here? This is a lovely surprise.
Oh, you know, I'm checking in on my husband, but I would appreciate it if you don't tell him about my assembly with your boss. It might just upset him. Of course I won't. It's good to see you, Sasha. Pregnancy suits you. You're positively glowing. Thanks. I don't really feel it. I'm exhausted. I'm suffering from continuous nausea. Oh, you poor thing. My sister was exactly like that, as sick as a dog throughout her entire pregnancy. Oh, there we go, she said. At the precise moment the beeper on the phone lit up with a red light, which she answered, while her keen eyes remained fixed on me. Yes, Marcus, she's here. Shall I send her in then? She looked up at me. Marcus will see you now, Sasha, she said, putting down the receiver whilst mouthing, good luck. Marcus Sutcliffe was sitting at his gleaming mahogany desk when I walked into his office. He was a smart, handsome man, fastidiously turned out in a pinstriped suit, with a sleek head of dark cropped hair, and brown kind eyes that were discerning and astute. He stood up upon seeing me with a broad grin on his face, then came over to me, kissing me effusively on both cheeks, his gaze dropping curiously to my pregnant belly.
Hello, Sasha. Not long now, he said, looking at me brightly. I think James was saying you only have 3 months left before the world is dramatically changed for the both of you, with a little pitter-patter of tiny feet and lots of sleepless nights, if I'm not mistaken. Enjoy the peace while you still get it. Believe me, I know all about it. I'm looking forward to it being all over, I must admit. I'm not going to kid. What they don't tell you about pregnancy is that your mind becomes like jello. Sometimes it's hard to even think straight. I've even become very clumsy. I'm always breaking things. It drives James quite mad. My wife said the very same thing when she was pregnant with Candace. She kept saying her mind had turned to marshmallow, he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. So what do I owe this unexpected surprise? He asked, looking at me earnestly. It's about my husband James. I thought as much, he said, raising a curious brow. Is everything all right at home? No, not really. I feel James is working far too hard. Marcus looked puzzled. I was thinking he looked rather drained the other day, I have to say. I thought it was all about the excitement of having an upcoming baby on the way. Why do you think he's working too hard, Sasha? I was hoping you could tell me that, Marcus. I notice he has so much overtime to do when he returns home every evening. Sometimes he's cracking the whip at both ends at 12 o'clock at night. He says he's inundated and swamped by the workload. I was hoping you could reduce it a little. He's utterly exhausted, overwhelmed by it all, to be perfectly honest with you. Actually, I'm growing increasingly concerned about his health. Marcus looked perturbed. I don't give any of my staff overtime, Sasha. I'm a firm believer that when they leave the building, they leave their work behind with them. Whatever your husband has been doing, it hasn't been overtime on my account. I can assure you of that. This time it was my turn to look bewildered. I could feel my cheeks burning red with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Marcus, I stammered. I had absolutely no idea. That wasn't the impression James gave me at all. I seem to have got my wires crossed. I really do apologise. Well, it might be a good idea to ask him what's going on, said Marcus, running his hands pensively through his brown hair. I mean, his work here is slacking a little, if I'm being brutally honest with you. I think something is clearly bothering him. Even I have noticed his demeanour lately. He's not himself. He's become quite crotchety and grumpy. I've been rather concerned about him. He seems unusually tense, rather on edge.
I've noticed that too, I said. That's why I came to see you. I'll get to the bottom of this, I assured Marcus. Thanks so much for seeing me. I'm sorry to have taken up your valuable time like this.
It's only a pleasure, Sasha. It's been lovely to see you again. I hope you get to the bottom of this enigmatic situation with your husband.
I walked away from that office, my head a complete whirl. I felt more than a little humiliated, pleading James' case for him, only to find my husband had been lying to me. He was working at something behind my back that was draining and sucking the life out of him. But the question was what? When I returned home, I was all guns blazing. I was quite literally ready to declare World War III on my husband. But things didn't pan out quite as I was anticipating, as invariably they never ever do. I was to discover James sitting at the walnut kitchen table, in one hell of a state. I'd never seen my husband look like this before. I could see his olive-skinned face was as white as a sheet. His jaw had tightened significantly, while his eyes darted around the kitchen like an anxious ferret.
"What on earth is wrong?"
I asked him, forgetting completely about how mad I was with him, as an anxious concern now swept over me.
"James, you're scaring the hell out of me. You look like you've been to the doctor's office today, and he's announced you've only got 2 months left to live with an inoperable form of brain cancer. What's going on?"
My husband brushed his hand over his mouth.
"You're barking up the wrong tree there, Munchkin. But what I've got to tell you is very bad."
I stared at my husband, feeling my heart pounding in my chest as I virtually gulped the air. "You've got something bad to tell me? How bad?"
"Now you really are scaring me. Very bad."
"Oh my God, what have you done?"
"I've done something very, very stupid. Insanely stupid. You're not going to be happy with me at all, Sasha."
"Go on," I said, feeling the nausea welling up in the back of my throat as I clutched my stomach tightly. Hearing my husband's unsavoury announcement was certainly ensuring my nausea was escalating at an alarming rate. In truth, I felt like throwing up violently, but I resisted the temptation by shifting in my seat, trying to remain very still.
"I've got myself in a little pickle over the last few months, I'm afraid. I've borrowed a sizable amount of money from a loan shark. He's expecting it back with a ludicrous amount of interest by the end of this month. If I don't pay it back, there's going to be hell to pay. And I don't say that lightly."
"What kind of trouble are you talking about?" This time it was my face that was growing an ashen white, as I tried to comprehend my husband's disquieting words.
"Let's just say that I don't want to find out. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. We're in a big mess, Sasha. This loan shark, his name is Joel Bloomberg. He's not a good person. He has a baleful, fearsome reputation of making people who don't pay him back disappear off the face of the earth, never ever to be seen again. There are all kinds of speculative, foreboding rumours about him. No one can prove a single thing, of course. They never can with people like him. He covers his tracks seamlessly. He's been investigated by the police numerous times, but they can never pin a thing on him. But let's just say this, he has a merciless reputation. He's ruthless, aggressive, downright dangerous."
I gasped. "Why would you deal with someone like that? Oh my God, what are we going to do? This is absolutely terrible."
"That's it. We're going to have to get away from here, leave our lives behind in Seattle, move somewhere where we can live undercover. We can try and assume different identities, give ourselves different names. I'll have to find a cash-in-hand job so that we do not leave behind a paper trail of any kind, as this man will find us, if we don't watch our backs, of course."
"How much money do you owe this moneylender?"
"You don't want to know." "How much? I need to know. You can't keep this kind of stuff from me. I'm your wife, for goodness sake. I deserve to know the truth." "It's not good for your pregnancy. You don't want to stress yourself out. You could get preeclampsia. You know what the doctor said. It's easy for stress to exacerbate high blood pressure in pregnancy."
"I think it's a bit late for that. I'm already stressing out, so you better tell me, and tell me now."
$300,000.
$300,000? How the hell are we going to afford to pay that back by the end of the month?
"We can't.
There's no way we can. It's not remotely possible.
I don't understand, James. How did you get to borrow $300,000? Tell me that. Who lends that kind of money? It's obscene. What on earth were you thinking? Why on earth would you do something like this? We haven't got the capacity to pay back that kind of money. You know we haven't. I don't think I could even ask my parents to raise that cash on a whim for us, even if I begged them to help us out. Besides, I'd never dream of asking them for money like that. What on earth did you spend it on?
I've got a problem with gambling. I gambled all our savings away online. I thought I could make it big for us. I really did. I got carried away, Sasha. I did first win over $80,000. I got excited about that. Then I lost it all. I thought it would change our lives. There were these gambling sites online, free opportunities to have a go. I guess I got hooked, reeled in.
Surely you know those things are rigged. Doesn't everybody know that? I guess that explains why you've been tapping away at your cell phone every night until the early hours of the morning. You've been gambling while I wrongly assumed Marcus was working you like a dog. More fool me. I feel like a prize idiot for not guessing what was going on. But lately with my pregnancy, I've had cauliflower growing between my ears.
I'm really sorry, Sasha. I don't blame you for any of this. It's all my fault. I take full responsibility. I got carried away. There's no excuse for what I've done.
No, there isn't. I feel sick to my stomach, James. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My tears were dry. I wanted to feel something, but I couldn't either. I was numb. I didn't feel anything at all. Instead, I stared blankly into space as I tried to assimilate the full gravity of what my husband was telling me. I wasn't even angry with him. I was too worn out to be angry, too stunned, disorientated, confused to make any sense of any of this at all. Please tell me this is a nightmare, I thought to myself, that I'm going to wake up from it any time soon. My husband was inadvertently telling me that we needed to disappear, that if he didn't pay the loan shark back, that something quite terrible was likely to happen to him, which left me with a hollow pit in the bottom of my gut. How the hell did we get entangled in a mess like this? Was this not the sort of thing that happened to other people? Not a mediocre run-of-the-mill couple like us that lived in a leafy green Seattle neighbourhood.
Say something, Sasha, said my husband. Are you going to leave me?
Leave you? I said, raising a brow. I think you've forgotten, James, that I'm actually your wife. I'm carrying our baby. I love you. We're embroiled in this mess together, whether you like it or not. Yes, I'm not happy with what you've done. Not happy at all. I should be screaming my lungs out, calling you every obscenity on the earth, and accusing you of ruining our lives. But in truth, I'm too shell-shocked to react. You've been a prize idiot, but I'm your wife. I'm not going to desert you, just because the going gets tough. Isn't that what marriages are about? Staying together in sickness and health? What you did was seriously sick in the head, but it's water under the bridge now.
I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to leave me. I squandered everything. I've messed up big time.
You've messed up, but I'm not going to leave you. But you can't gamble anymore. You've got to stop, James. Otherwise, this addiction of yours is literally going to destroy our lives and our baby's future. You've already blown our savings from what you're telling me. We virtually have no money left in the bank, which might explain why on Tuesday my card was refused at the checkout. I thought you'd forgotten to put in the funds to my account. Luckily, I had some cash to get myself out of that prickly predicament. I just wish you'd told me sooner that you were having problems. We could have nipped this in the bud. You could have got yourself some professional help.
I know, you're absolutely right. But the question is, what are we going to do? We barely have any money.
Can you not call the police, James, I asked, knowing full well what my husband's answer to that would be.
No way. You can't call the police on thugs like this. That would make things 1,000 times worse for us.
Me and my husband talked diligently to the early hours of the morning, deciding what course of action we were going to take. We needed to disappear, but vanishing is never easy. I knew that there are people in Japan known as the jujitsu, which is a Japanese word for evaporation, when people deliberately decide to disappear from their own lives on purpose, seemingly vanishing into thin air. They leave their homes, their jobs, and their families, sometimes not being seen for decades. There are even companies you can hire in Japan to help you disappear in the middle of the night without a trace. Abused women running away from husbands, or people leaving stressed jobs or abusive families, or even running away to escape their own lives. In our case, we were running away from an evil debt collector who more than likely would cause my husband seriously bodily harm, or, dare I say, even kill him. Of course, I didn't articulate those very words. They remained unspoken between us, but we were both thinking them. I knew that, like those individuals in Japan, we needed to vanish off the face of the earth without leaving a single trace. We had to assume new identities, and this was not going to be easy. But then I had a great idea. I phoned my best friend using a burner phone, so hopefully the call wouldn't be traced. Melinda Beckingsdale parents lived on a farm in West Virginia, which was a sizable 36 hours away from Seattle. They often needed help on their farm. Furthermore, they had a little cottage where we might be able to live on the land. I decided to give her a call.
Melinda, it's Sasha. Oh my God, Sasha, is that you? It's been forever. I haven't seen you in an age. How are you doing?
Not so well, I'm afraid. I've got myself in a spot of bother. Or rather, should I say, James has. He's got us into the trouble, which is an understatement, actually.
Oh no! What happened? Are you all right? Is there anything I can possibly do?
Well, there is. Do your parents perhaps need a hand on their farm? Is their cottage available? I remember you saying they were always looking out for help on the farm.
Melinda chuckled. You know them, Sasha. They always need help.
They're very selective, of course, about where they get that help from. You know them, they're so private.
As it happens, the cottage is free. Are you wanting to move in? If you help them on the farm, you can have it rent-free, no problems, and they'll pay you cash in hand for any work you do.
I guess it's what you're looking for in the circumstances. Besides, I'm sure they'd be so delighted to have you two around. What on earth is going on? I'd love to help, Sasha. It's complicated. The less you know, the better.
Don't be silly, Sasha. Let me help. I'd like to help in any way that I can. If the boot was on the other foot, you wouldn't hesitate to help me either.
Well, my husband's in trouble with a very formidable loan shark, who's a slippery, shady character, if ever I saw one. He's demanding James to pay him $300,000 by the end of the month, or else. I don't even want to imagine what else means, but let's just say it's an unarticulated, deadly threat. There's no way on this earth that James can pay that kind of money back. So we have to vanish off the face of the earth so that this unscrupulous, corrupt character doesn't actually find us. If you get on his wrong side, you don't pay him back. He has a habit of making his clients disappear for good, never to be seen ever again, if you get my drift. It's terrifying stuff. The man is treacherous.
You've got to be kidding, Sasha. That is terrible. I've heard stories about unethical loan sharks before that would make your hair curl.
You need to watch your back, Sasha. Both of you do. Those people have no scruples, no moral compass, no sense of decency whatsoever. They charge obscene amounts of interest, and they can really be so dangerous. Why does your husband James owe them so much? A gambling addiction, would you believe it? I didn't even know about it. I naively thought he was working overtime when he was spending all his time gambling online. I can't believe that I was so ignorant at failing to see what was going on under my very nose. Oh my goodness, that's so bad, Sasha. I'm sorry. Gambling addiction is a huge problem. Those online sites are a hell of a temptation for any addict. I remember going to a casino once, seeing people throwing their life savings down the plug hole. It's desperately sad. Some of them look like such lost souls. It just breaks your heart. Are you sure, Melinda, that your parents will be agreeable for us to live in their cottage? We would earn our keep, we really would. We desperately need a change of address and a way to make a living indefinitely so that we can keep under the radar. We'll do absolutely anything. Don't you worry your cotton socks, Sasha. It's all sorted out. I'll speak to my folks for you. My parents would simply love having you staying there. I'll tell them to keep their mouths shut about your presence on their property. Not that you need to worry. They're not exactly garrulous. Are you sure I can't try and raise that money that you owe for you? But to get hold of that money, I will need a couple of weeks first. Melinda, I can't ask you to do that. That would be crazy. It's good of you to offer, though. I'd love to accept your offer, though, of living on the farm in your cottage, if you're sure we won't be an imposition.
Of course you won't be. I'm so glad to be able to help. I know my parents will be over the moon having that extra help with harvesting peaches and apples and dealing with the rotational corn crops. You'll be a godsend to them. They'll appreciate the extra help on the farm, and the good company, of course. I don't know what to say. You're a gem. You've quite literally saved our lives. It's no trouble, Sasha. I know if I was in the same kind of pickle, you would do the same for me. How's your pregnancy going, by the way? I'm 6 months gone. I'm suffering from the most horrendous morning sickness. This pregnancy hasn't been easy. You poor, poor thing. This is all you need to be moving away when you're so heavily pregnant. But still needs must. You must be as mad as hell with James for letting you down like this. You know, I possibly should be, Melinda, but frankly, I'm too shattered to be angry. Pregnancy just drains you so much. I felt so relieved after speaking to Melinda. I knew she would come through for us. She'd always been a great friend of mine. Before long, my husband and I made plans to disappear in the middle of the night, to make the long drawn-out drive to West Virginia, which was going to be a 36-hour trip. We had informed our landlord we were leaving her fully furnished apartment, while James had spoken to his boss, given his notice. Marcus was sorry to see him go, but very understanding, promising to keep his mouth firmly shut. I had decided not to say goodbyes to any of my girlfriends, as the less people that knew about our vanishing plan, the better. We could not afford to be too careful. It was very distressing to leave my life behind in Seattle, to not contact any of my friends. I managed to sell my car to raise some much-needed available cash. We were well on our way. We closed our bank accounts, bought several burner phones without internet connections, got rid of our original cell phones, as they can so easily be traced. Besides, without an internet connection, my husband James would be forced to go cold turkey. Hopefully we could say goodbye to his online addiction, although ideally he really did require professional help. But being on the run, we weren't in the position of acquiring it for him. I would speak to my parents on a burner phone once a month. As they lived in Atlanta, they wouldn't have a clue that we were no longer in Seattle. The less they knew about our plans, the better. I didn't want to embroil them in our fiasco, cause them undue stress. As they were already dealing with a plethora of health issues, I didn't want to add stress to the equation. James and I woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning on the day we were leaving. We packed all our worldly possessions in the back of our truck. I physically went out into the street to check that there were no suspicious cars, secretly keeping watch over our home, as you can never be too sure of the lengths a debt collector would be prepared to go to. It had come to my attention during the day that a black BMW had been following me around town, so I was fully aware I was being watched by these insidious characters. I felt reasonably confident that no one was watching our house right now. The quiet street appeared sleepy, with not a solitary soul in sight. All that greeted me was a Seattle cool breeze. A few of the oak trees swayed their branches in the wind, while the street lights lit up the dark, shadowy corners. I really did feel satisfied that we were safe to leave and make our hasty escape, like two fugitives on the run from the police. Needless to say, the long journey in our truck was exhausting for a pregnant woman, so we did make a couple of stopovers at bed and breakfasts on the way, where we paid cash in hand for our overnight stops, where we were privileged to stay with a couple of delightful couples who made us cordially welcome in their homes and luckily didn't ask too many probing questions. Wherever we went, I knew we would never be able to fully relax. We had to be vigilant about every move we made, as anyone could be watching us from the shadows. Finally, we found ourselves only minutes away from Melinda's parents' farm. The relief I felt was immeasurable, as being cooped up in the truck for so long had been a disagreeable experience for a normal functioning adult, but for a pregnant woman it had been completely insufferable. Sadly, we couldn't risk taking a short flight to Virginia, which would have been infinitely more preferable, but would have left behind a paper trail. Besides, we needed my husband's truck. I was hoping that we had left no record of ourselves that could be uncovered by those nefarious loan sharks who were not prepared to accept monthly instalments and were charging a ludicrous amount of interest on my husband's loan, which was nothing short of criminal extortion. We really had no choice but to disappear. "Well, you'll be glad to know, Sasha, we're nearly there. I can hardly wait," my husband exclaimed. "Oh, I am glad," I said, sighing with relief. "I can't wait to stretch my weary legs." We had driven off the interstate and were now driving in rugged countryside, surrounded by tall statuesque trees on high embankments, sporadically passing farmers' fields of corn, barley, wheat or tobacco. Before long we drove down a bumpy road that was shaped like a crooked finger.
It may well have been asphalt at one time, but it was crumbled and worn away, heavily overgrown by weeds. We took a few swift turns and finally saw a signpost to Honeybrook Farm. We were soon driving down an earthen country road that led to a large black iron gate that was left wide open for us. I could see a dilapidated sign attached to the iron bars that had been worn away by the weather, saying Honeybrook Farm. It appeared really rather rusty. We drove past orchards of apples and peach trees, a field of corn and a meadow with a couple of horses frolicking away happily and grazing in a field. Finally we arrived at the breathtakingly beautiful farmhouse nestled in the heart of the valley, surrounded by masterful imposing backdrops of mountains that dappled the furthest horizon in a hazy purple hue. The rear of the property was heavily fringed by a vast, resplendent, impressive-looking wood grove made up of mature statuesque oak and maple trees. The farmhouse itself was a double-storey symmetrical affair, a vast red brick building with large sash windows and matching black shutters, a grey slate roof and a wraparound porch on the lowest elevation, framed by ornate columns that led directly to the front door. I could see a man with a full thatch of thick white hair, wearing a blue plaid shirt and jeans, dashing down the steps, ambling hurriedly towards us as we parked our truck on the red brick driveway. "Come on in," he said, opening the truck door and shaking my husband's hand profusely while giving him a friendly thump on the back. "It's very good to meet you. You must be James. Melinda has told me all about you. My name is Clive. I'm Melinda's father." "Pleased to meet you, Clive," said my husband, giving the man a big grin. Clive bounded over to my side of the truck, opening the door for me. I was well acquainted with the jovial farmer, thanks to my long-standing friendship with his daughter Melinda. Clive looked remarkably good for a man in his late 60s, as with the exception of his thick white hair, he didn't look a day over 40. I thought it must be the fresh air and exercise that kept him in such good nick. He did not appear to have succumbed to the pear-shaped effects of gravity that affect so many. I secretly hoped that I could age this gracefully. "It's so good to see you, Sasha," he said, giving me a warm, affectionate hug and glancing down at my huge belly. "Melinda told me you were heavily pregnant. When is it due?" "I'm due in 3 months," I said. "Oh, it'll be exciting having a baby around the place. Hetty would love to do some babysitting for you, I'm sure. She adores babies. You two must come in at once. Have some refreshments before I take you up to the cottage." As if on cue, Hetty came rushing out of the house, oscillating her arms excitedly in effusive dramatic gestures that displayed her enthusiasm to see us, her heavily lined face breaking out into a broad beam. She was a bubbly woman in her early 60s, slightly rounded around the hips, with a full head of short grey hair that had been stylishly cut in a way that made her appear elegant and younger in years. Her 2 large black rambunctious Labradors did not relinquish their enthusiasm either. They'd been trained not to jump up on strangers, but that did not stop them from showering us with a gleeful welcome, which included thumping their tails on the ground and letting out a couple of exuberant woofs. "Please come in," she said, giving me a big hug and offering me an expressive explanation at the size of my bump. "Do you mind?" she said, putting her hand on my stomach. "May I have a feel?" "Of course," I said. Hetty led us to her gorgeous country-style kitchen. It was incredibly stunning, very stylish, with white cabinetry, white quartz surfaces, and it gleamed. There was also a flagstone floor. The kitchen door overlooked a sizable backyard, where she grew all the family vegetables, from squashes, tomatoes to spinach and lettuce. I could see dozens of free-range hens meandering through the vegetable beds, gleaming worms for themselves. It really felt as if we were in the south of France. It had that quintessential rustic feel about it. "Now you sit down, please," said Hetty, insisting I get my legs up. "You must both be so exhausted after your trip," she said, bustling around and putting a large kettle onto the gas hob of her range. "I think some tea's in order, don't you?" "Sounds lovely," I said. "I mean to say, Hetty, thank you so much for letting us move into your cottage. Melinda explained to us that you need a fresh start, to keep a low profile. Frankly, you couldn't have chosen a better place than our home to hide out in. This is quite a sanctuary we have here. I think you should feel very safe. Besides, I'm sure Heath will keep a good eye on you. He can be a grumpy old man at times, but his heart's in the right place. He's very, very protective. He'll definitely have your backs, and that makes me feel very assured." I was just about to ask Hetty who Heath actually was when Cliff began to talk about the cottage.
"It's fully furnished," he explained. "It's an apple pie order. A very pretty, beguiling place, overlooking a fabulous creek, fringed by lots and lots of trees. You will definitely love it there. I can offer you plenty of work on the farm. In truth, I was about to employ an extra farmhand to help me, so you've come around at the perfect time." "That'll be great," said James. "I really appreciate it." "We consider you friends. Don't forget that for a moment. We're terribly pleased to have you both staying here. Me and Hetty are rather private people, usually wary of strangers, so having familiar faces around here, or friends of Melinda's, is an honour for us. We're very, very glad you came. We appreciate the company as well." "Do you have any other workers here helping you?" I asked, growing a little concerned. "I'm just worried that they might talk, you know, as we need to be very discreet. There's a dangerous man who will try his uttermost to locate us, a lone shark that can't be trusted." "You need not worry, dear, about that. My workers are exceedingly trustworthy people. They've been with me for many years. They're not big talkers. Besides, with your new names, no one is likely to guess that you are the Harpers that ran away from Seattle. What have you decided to call yourselves? I assume you are changing your names." "Yes, I thought I'd call myself Sarah Taylor, as that's close to Sasha, and my husband's going to call himself Johnny Taylor." "That's very good. I like the sound of that. I think that won't be very difficult to remember. Sarah and Johnny. Yes, it rolls off the tongue rather easily." "Now for some tea," said Hetty. I was shocked to see that she prepared some tea not only for us, but for her 2 boisterous Labradors, who lapped it up enthusiastically after it had been cooled down in their doggy bowls. "You give your dogs tea?" I asked in surprise. "Yes, I do. Would you believe it? They love it. I only started to give it to them when Bella started barking every time I drank tea. So just to humour her, I placed some in a bowl. She loved it. I swear to you it's actually improved their health. You know, black tea is full of antioxidants. It can boost your heart health, cell function, blood sugar levels. My vet has asked me why they're positively glowing. He's seen a vast improvement in their health. I swear it's the tea. Who would have imagined that that was possible?" "I guess stranger things have happened," I said. "I have a friend who swears a tablespoon of turmeric in her dog's food has added years to her dog's life. I think it's a powerful anti-inflammatory." I watched the dogs in fascination as they lapped up their tea. "Would you like some blueberry muffins, dear?" Hetty asked me. "Love some," I said. "Did you bake them yourself? They're absolutely delicious." "Hetty's a big baker," said Clive proudly. "I'm a very lucky man indeed. It's a good job I work the fields very hard. I'd probably be the size of a small tractor by now if I didn't, with Hetty's sumptuous cooking all the time." After tea, Clive jumped into his truck. He asked us to follow him in our truck, and we did so, driving past a couple of meadows down the windy gravel road with a signpost that said Windy Willow's Cottage. We followed the road and found ourselves staring at the prettiest cottage we'd ever seen. It was a red brick home like the main farmhouse, but a much smaller version, as if done in miniature, with black shutters, a grey slate roof, along with the cutest wraparound porch that overlooked a pretty little creek, heavily fringed by statuesque oak trees. "It's absolutely gorgeous," I said to Clive, "just like your farmhouse, only in miniature." "Well, that's the general idea. We built the cottage with the idea of retirement in mind, so that moving in here one day would be pretty straightforward. We could rent out the main farmhouse and the land to a younger, more aspiring farmer in the future. It would be hard to give up the big farmhouse, so we made a miniature version of it. Hence Windy Willow Cottage, here we are," he said. I watched him ferreting around in his pocket to pull out a bunch of keys, which jangled in his hands as he handed them to James. "These are the keys for the cottage. I'll love you and leave you. I'm sure you're both dying to get unpacked and to have a much-needed hot bath. There'll be plenty of hot water on tap. I'm sure you must be feeling sticky after all the travelling. And you, young lady, you need to put your feet up and relax. We can't have you giving birth 3 months prematurely, can we?" he said, winking at me. "I just want to say, Clive," I said, enveloping him in a big warm hug, "you have absolutely no idea how incredibly grateful James and I are for what you've done for the both of us, giving us this place to stay and somewhere to work on your farm.
You've quite literally saved our skins. Clive chuckled, raising his hand to his temple in a mock salute. I'm glad to be of service, he teased. It's a pleasure. In truth, I was more than a little overwhelmed as we entered the cute little 2-story cottage. It was so enchanting. The lower floor had been transformed into open-plan living at its finest, as the fashionable ultra-modern kitchen was sprinkled flamboyantly with a dash of old-world vintage charm that gave the kitchen a unique look, as the classical influences ironed out the stark coldness so often seen in avant-garde cutting-edge designs. The kitchen folded seamlessly into the living area, then into the library. The library was fitted with bespoke bookshelves, bursting with hundreds of books from how to propagate your own ferns to the secrets of great mystics. There was a lot to read. The library then folded into the sitting room, which possessed a huge open fiery grate with a very elegant marble mantel, and then there was an ornate sweeping staircase lined with a long ribbon of Persian carpet that led to the upper floors, showcasing 4 bedrooms, one main bedroom with its bathroom en suite, and a separate bathroom to accommodate the remaining bedrooms. Everything had been meticulously decorated, with glamorous upholstered chairs, sumptuous settees, and verbose oakwood furnishing. "What's wrong, Sasha?" asked my husband, seeing my eyes misting over with tears. "Don't you think the place is rather charming?" "Of course I do. Have you forgotten my name is Sarah?" I whispered. "I just can't believe the kindness of these people. I'm so moved. I mean, I'm sure we'll never be found hiding out here." Little did I realize I was rather premature in my thinking. 36 hours away in Seattle, a young man shook his short crop of blonde curls nervously. He had been recruited to watch the Harpers' semi-detached Seattle residence day and night, but his boss did not know that last night he had failed to watch the house. He was certain that the couple were not going to do a runner, as his pedantic boss had insinuated. He had returned home to spend an early night with his girlfriend, who had been complaining bitterly that he was never around. What the boss did not know would not hurt him. Now this he could hardly believe, as he stared at the semi-detached house in horror, coming to the stunning revelation that it was unnaturally quiet. The blinds were all drawn when they would normally be open at this time of the morning. There was no truck parked in the driveway that would usually be used by the female resident, a woman called Sasha Harper. There were clearly no signs of life. It looked ominously and disturbingly quiet. Even as he approached the front door, he could see a professional-looking woman opening up the house with a massive bunch of jangling keys, who looked suspiciously like an agent or landlord. The man's heart sank like a huge stone disappearing into the murky depths of a large river. His gut seemed to twist around itself in knots, like twirls of spaghetti at the end of a fork. He climbed out of his smart black BMW, one of the perks of his job, and ambled casually over to the house with a nonchalant, carefree attitude. The agent saw the young man approaching the front door that she was opening. She looked up at him in surprise through her eclectic red glasses that framed her curious green eyes. She smiled at the young man, flashing him a large set of perfect, expensive-looking white teeth. "Are you looking for the Harpers?" she asked. The man nodded sheepishly. "You're a friend of Sasha and James?" she asked. "I am indeed. I was just popping over to see if James fancied joining me for breakfast this morning." "They didn't tell you then?" said the woman in surprise. "Tell me what?" asked the man. "They gave me their notice a week ago," said the woman. "I'm their landlord. I'm about to lease the property to another young couple. It's a pity you missed them." "Do you know where they've gone?" "That's the strange thing," said the woman. "They left no forwarding address." The young man bowed his head politely to the woman. He ambled back to his black BMW, feeling exceedingly annoyed with himself. He slunk back on the leather seats, groaning, while he slammed the car door behind him. Then he began to slap the steering wheel with his hands, pounding it so hard like a punching bag, to express his seething rage, as he shouted out every four-lettered obscenity that came to his mind. "Bloody hell!" he squirmed. "What the heck am I going to do now? What a bloody idiot I am! The moment I turn my back, that young man and his pregnant wife have successfully inveigled me. They've done a runner. They could be anywhere in America right now." He had never suspected for a moment they would do a vanishing act on him. In no way had they behaved suspiciously in their daily, everyday routines. He had been well and truly hoodwinked. He felt like a prize idiot. The young man's stomach lurched, doing a series of acrobatic somersaults. He could feel the nauseous bile rising up in the back of his throat. He fought back the bitter, repugnant taste. He had to think very quickly on his feet. He didn't have much time. He knew what his guileful, duplicitous big boss, the debt collector Joe Bloomberg, was capable of. He glanced down at the 2 missing digits on his left hand. A stark reminder. They'd been chopped off by Joe when he'd failed to collect a debt on time. He recalled the harrowing moment of agonizing pain, when he thought Joe was pretending, making up a game of chopping off his fingers. But to his amazement, the machete had been slammed down on his 2 fingers. He'd screamed out in agonizing, excruciating pain, while his 2 fingers had been flung to the ground. He'd watched in horror as they'd been thrown to the dog, hungrily gobbled up. He had tried desperately to retrieve them from the dog, but the dog was not going to share his delicious treat with anyone. The vicious Rottweiler had growled warningly at him, while Joe Bloomberg had laughed. It made him sick to the stomach. Working for a man like Joel Bloomberg was terrifying. The man was a tyrant. He was fully aware of the trouble he would be in when he reported back to base. What was he going to say? "Sorry, Joel. The young couple that owe you $300,000 disappeared on my watch." He remembered the day he'd gone into Joel's office, seen the plastic target bag on the silver tray that had swathed the contours of a man's severed head. A lone piece of blonde hair had popped out of a hole in the plastic. He had recognized it as belonging to Tom, who had been Joel Bloomberg's right-hand man. If that's what Joe did to his right-hand man, who had let him down, there was no telling what he was capable of doing now. That's what happened if you betrayed the likes of Joe Bloomberg. He had absolutely no loyalty to anyone. He would easily throw you to the wolves in a heartbeat. He'd remembered that poignant day as if it was yesterday, his big boss wearing the white sports jacket and pants with a thick gold chain around his neck. He'd acted so nonchalant, as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, when he'd seen the human head in the plastic bag perched on the silver tray, as if it was an ostrich egg on display. He recalled how Joel seemed indifferent to the severed head, as if it was no big deal to him. How could anyone be like that? To the young man, the image represented his biggest fears. He didn't want to end up the next severed head on Joel Bloomberg's desk. All Mr. Bloomberg was interested in was charging people excessive amounts of interest and making huge bucks out of his clients. No wonder he was rolling in money. People were absolutely petrified of the man. They would turn over all their worldly possessions to him just to save their skins. He knew that anyone doing business with Joel was dicing with death, playing Russian roulette with their own lives. For one thing was absolutely certain. If you upset Joel Bloomberg, you couldn't expect to be breathing for much longer. He couldn't figure out why Joel had lent such a measly amount of money to the young couple, when he was used to dealing with much bigger numbers. The young man pulled up Joel Bloomberg's grandiose driveway in his black BMW, where the grim, scowling security guard in the entrance opened up the large, black, ornate iron gates dutifully for him. He had parked in the pristine brick driveway, ambling towards the very tasteless, over-the-top palatial mansion, with a plethora of ornate columns and statues on display that framed the front arched entrance of the home. The huge bodyguard with his bubbly, beefy arms stood in the doorway like a belligerent Rottweiler. The man looked as if he spent his entire life injecting himself with steroids. "You'll find Mr. Bloomberg in his office," he barked. "He's expecting you." The young man trembled as he knocked at the door, glancing at the 2 missing digits on his left hand. His knees trembled. His heart thundered violently in his chest. His hands became wet and clammy. All he could do was hope and pray that his boss was in a good mood. It turned out he was. It was the young man's lucky day. "Come in," came Joel's voice. "Oh, there you are, Christopher," he said, lifting up a tot of whiskey, swinging it down in a vulgar glug. "I understand you've got some news for me." He was sitting in a tasteless chair that was ornately carved, painted in gold leaf, resembling a throne. All he needed was a crown, the young man thought to himself. "That's right, sir. I have. Good news, I hope." "I'm in a very, very good mood today, Christopher. I've learnt that I've become an uncle. At 3:30 this morning, my sister Juanita gave birth to a 7-pound baby boy.
They've called him Joel after me. I'm very chuffed. Of course you are, sir. Wow, that is incredible. Congratulations are in order, sir. I'm very pleased for you. So what's your news, Christopher? I'm afraid the news isn't good, sir. The young Harper couple have done a runner, but they only borrowed pin money from you. It was only $300,000, not big money. But how did that happen? You were supposed to be watching the house, Joel growled angrily, his eyes widening in an expression of displeasure. You know I don't like it when people do a runner. Sir, I'm sorry. I became violently ill. I ate a dodgy curry. I think it was off, gone rancid or something. I had to throw up on the side of the road. I saw the couple hurriedly leave, but I couldn't stop hurling. They managed to escape. I was violently ill, sir. There was nothing I could do to stop it. You bloody idiot. You're lucky I'm in a good mood, Chris. Or I might have removed another 2 of your digits. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir, said Chris, taking a gulp of relieved fresh air. He had dodged a bullet. Losing another 2 digits would have been too much to stomach. It was hard operating with 2 less fingers on his left hand anyway. Well, you know what we need to do now. You have a month to find the couple. I don't care what you do. You need to find them, or I will not be a happy man. Do you understand, Christopher? You don't want to be around me when I'm unhappy. I do bad things when I'm not pleased, he said, focusing his eyes on Chris's missing digits. Chris shuddered. He certainly got the message. Yes, sir. I'll find them, sir. I promise you, sir, I will. Someone must know where they've gone. In West Virginia, 36 hours away, it would seem that me and my husband James had settled very well into farm life, becoming close to Clive and his wife Hetty, along with their 2 adorable black Labradors. James had been giving Clyde a hand on the farm. By all accounts, he was enjoying the outdoor life. He'd already developed a golden tan on his face. The black circles from tense, overwrought exhaustion had dissipated. Instead of looking fearful and anxious, his brown eyes wore a happy, contented look. I smiled happily to myself. I hadn't seen my husband look this upbeat in a long time. He had even admitted to me that the lure of gambling online had dissipated. He barely gave the internet a second thought. After bracing the elements every morning, driving the tractor, riding the horses and attending to the crops, he felt exhausted by the end of the day, but in a good way. He loved nothing more than to unwind after a hard day's work with an ice-cold beer in his hand, watching the sky develop in a tangerine orange, yellow and pink hue as the sun set over the valley. He loved watching the bedazzling views on the wraparound porch that overlooked the beguiling creek. He also enjoyed watching the few deers that would gather together, congregating at the water to enjoy a drink. These days I'm glad to say that my morning sickness was a lot more manageable. We both had promptly decided that we would live as Sarah and Jonathan Taylor. When the time was right, we would put enough money away and try and get false IDs and open up new bank accounts. One night, me and my husband were sitting on the back porch. We saw a shadowy figure moving through the trees, standing yards away from us, looking directly at us through curious eyes. "Oh, my God! It's a Bigfoot! What else can it be?" I whispered. "I can't believe it." "By Jove! I do believe you're right. I didn't even think those things were real." We'd only seen the creature for a fleeting second. It had happened far too quickly for me to get a full overview of it, but I had seen it studying us with a look of intrigue on its human-like face. I couldn't wait to tell Hetty in the morning what I'd seen. I doubted she would believe my story. I could hardly believe it. The following morning I scrambled hurriedly towards the main farmhouse, my face flushed pink with excitement. Hetty had ushered me into the kitchen, where I received the usual rapturous welcome from the 2 black Labradors. I watched her engage in her usual ritual of preparing the 4 of us tea. So while the 2 dogs lapped down their warm beverage, Hetty and I took respectable little sips out of mugs of tea at the kitchen table. I was naturally bursting with enthusiasm to tell her my story. "Out with it," said Hetty. "I can tell you're bursting at the seams to tell me something. Get on with it." "Last night I saw a Bigfoot," I told her. "I know you won't believe me, but I'm not making this up." "Oh, I see. So Heath has revealed himself to you, has he?"
laughed Hetty. "You've obviously won him round, then. He would never show himself to you unless he approves of your energy. Bigfoots are all about energy. They read it all the time, like you or I might read body language. They have the innate ability to look into your mind, to read your thoughts." "You know that, Bigfoot?" "Oh, yes, I know Heath very well, dear. He's getting on in age now, but he watches over the farm for us. I feel infinitely safer knowing he's around. He's been on this farm from when I was a little girl. He'd watch over us kids for my father when we were very young. One time when I was little, I fell down a ditch. He rescued me. He brought me safely back home. He's always been a quiet, unassuming fellow, rather reticent, reserved, but he watches over this farm like a hawk. He knows everything that's going on." "But I don't understand. Aren't Bigfoot supposed to be dangerous? I mean, I've heard stories." "Well, Heath would be dangerous if he needed to be. If someone untoward was wandering around our property, like one of those dodgy, inauspicious loan sharks that are after the two of you, he'll read those people's energy. So if a person's evil, he'll pick it up in a heartbeat. In Heath's mind, evil needs to be eliminated. So yes, he would be dangerous to someone with guileful intent. He doesn't have that human perspective that a person needs a fair trial before he's condemned. If an apple is rotten, it needs to be discarded, as far as Heath is concerned. That's the way he feels about things. A rotten human or a rotten Bigfoot needs discarding. He won't discriminate in that regard. He's very protective over this place and territorial, but like a lot of old people, he's got a little cranky in his old age. So the fact that he showed himself to you is a big deal. You've clearly won him round." "But I didn't do anything." "He clearly approved of your energy. He would have been watching you for quite some time from the shadows." "Oh, Hetty, are you saying what I think you're saying? That Heath would protect us if the need should arise?" "Oh, absolutely. He's seen you both staying in our cottage. He knows anyone staying on our farm is considered family, so he'll be keeping a watchful eye over you, especially your being pregnant. That will make him hugely protective towards you." "Where is his family?" "Well, they move around, but Heath, being old, just stays in one place. During the winter he makes himself cosy and comfortable in our barn. I often leave him stuff in the woodgrove. He absolutely adores my blueberry muffins. I always make him a large batch. He's so appreciative." "Wow, that's incredible. Do you tell anyone about him?" "Oh, heavens, no. He's part of my family. I'd never tell anyone about him. That would be nonsensical to me. As far as anyone else is concerned, I wouldn't dream of acknowledging Bigfoots are real. I want to protect Heath as much as he is desirous in protecting us." Back in Seattle, Marcus Sutcliffe climbed into his truck in the parking bay after a hard day at work. He was looking forward to spending the weekend with his wife and kids. They were planning on having a festive barbecue with other members of the Sutcliffe family and a handful of close family friends. It was going to be a great way to celebrate his wife's 40th birthday. They'd been looking forward to the celebratory occasion for many weeks now. As he trudged over to his truck to open the door, he felt a cold metal revolver being pointed at his temple. "Get into your truck," came a man's voice. "Drive." Marcus was hoping that the cameras at work would be capturing his abductor on film, but they were pointing in a different direction. Someone had deliberately moved them. "Drive," screamed the man, "or I'll put a bullet in your head." Marcus trembled as he started up his car. He looked at the young man with the blonde hair and blue eyes in surprise. He didn't look like a thug. "What do you want with me?" he stammered. "If it's money you want, you can take cash in my wallet. But please let me go. I've got 2 kids and a wife who need me. They can't afford to be without a father." "It's not your wallet I want, Mr. Sutcliffe. It's information I need. Now drive." Marcus obediently followed the man's directions fastidiously as he drove his truck out of Seattle. He was then asked to pull over to the side of the road near an embankment of trees, where he was gagged, blindfolded, and his hands tied behind his back, while he was thrown into the back of the trunk. "What are you doing with me? Please, please don't. I'm very frightened of confined spaces. I get claustrophobia. Please don't put me in the trunk. I beg you." "Not my problem," said the man. "Please, I beg you." What the hell was going on, Marcus wondered, as he began thumping around in the trunk, desperately trying to find a lever to open it from the inside, but there was nothing accessible for him to make his escape. He was beginning to feel his chest tightening as his heart began to race. He was suffering a full-blown panic attack. He knew he was. As his fear of confined spaces terrified him, he was struggling to breathe. But he told himself to calm down, to get a grip. He knew he could get through this situation if he kept his wits about him, he told himself. How long he was stuck in the back of the truck, he didn't know. But the man driving it had driven speedily and jolted a lot during the journey, making him conclude that they were somewhere in the countryside, as the previous smooth roads had become exceedingly bumpy and uneven. When the truck finally reached a standstill and was parked on a pebbly driveway, the trunk was flung open, the blindfold removed from his eyes. He was bundled out of the trunk. It was a dark, tenebrous night. Marcus stumbled over the precipitous turf. Having worn a blindfold for so long, he was struggling to see clearly, but the torch the young man was carrying lit up the pebbly path. "Get a move on," said the man, cuffing his hands behind his back, where he was led at gunpoint to a farm building. He was thrown into the barn to join the barrels of hay. The man switched on a dimmer light in the barn and studied Marcus through hostile eyes. "Now let's get down to business," said the man with the blonde hair and the seemingly angelic face, who had covered half his face with a bandana, so you couldn't see his profile clearly. But Marcus had seen his face earlier on, and didn't forget a face, especially not one like that. "I want to know about James Harper. I want to know where he's gone. He's done a disappearing act with that pregnant wife of his. I need to know where he is." "I don't know," said Marcus. "He just up and left. I don't know where he's gone. He never gave me the details. I don't know intimate things like that about my staff." "Where is James Harper?" repeated the man, kicking Marcus in the leg. "You heard me. Where is James Harper? I need to know. You tell me now. Where is he? I want to know." He winced. "I told you. I don't know." The man with the blonde hair began to grow belligerent. He put the revolver against Marcus's temple. "I can pull the trigger if you don't cooperate with me. It would be an awful shame to never see our family again, would it not? That lovely wife of yours is going to have her 40th birthday party this weekend. Wouldn't it be a dreadful pity to have your corpse delivered to her front door as a birthday present?" "You wouldn't," gasped Marcus. "I will do whatever it takes, Marcus, to find James Harper. If it means killing you, then so be it. If it means killing your wife, then I will do it. But if you want to get away with a breath in your lungs and a ticking heart, then you better start talking, and talking now. I have no intention of killing you, but if you don't cooperate, I will be forced to pull the trigger. We wouldn't want that, would we? Start talking." "Look, I don't know anything. All I know is that they were going to West Virginia to stay at a cottage on a friend's farm. I think it was called Honeybrook Farm. I think the cottage was called Windy Willow. I'm not sure. That's all I know. Now can I go?" The man with the blonde hair handed him a burner phone. "Call your wife. Tell her something's come up, that you've gone away for the weekend on business. You better be convincing, or I'll shoot you dead. I don't want the police sniffing around, or I'll kill you. Do you understand that?" Marcus nodded. He dialed his wife's phone number. "Hello?" "Hello, Diane. It's me, Marcus. Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. You've been gone for hours. Your cell phone just goes to voicemail. I've been worried out of my mind." "I'm fine, honey. Calm down. I got caught up in a meeting at work that went on for longer than intended." "But that's not like you. You don't do stuff like this. You never work late." "This is an exception, honey. I don't know how to say this to you, but I'm going to be away for a few days. I'll be away for your 40th birthday on Sunday. Something's come up that's terribly important. I can't give it a miss." "You've got to be kidding, Marcus. What's so important that you'd forget my 40th birthday? The whole idea is for us to be celebrating it together. I can't believe you're doing this to me. This is so unlike you. What is so important? What's more important than my birthday?" "Something highly confidential, sweetheart.
I would not miss your birthday for the world if I could avoid it. But I have to do this. It is incredibly important. Trust me on this. What could be that important? I don't understand. This is so unlike you, Marcus. What the heck is going on? You're making no sense. I've got to go. Sorry, sweetheart. The man with the blonde hair snatched the phone from Marcus. That's enough, he said. You've told your wife what she needs to know. She's not happy, said Marcus. You heard her. She smells a rat. I'm sorry, Marcus. It's too bad. I want to tell you I don't enjoy doing this to you. In fact, I've got a very difficult boss who is making my life a living hell. I don't have a choice in the matter. Now, there's food there, and drink, and a couple of novels for you to read to keep you entertained, he said, uncuffing the man's hands and tying his foot to a chain which he attached to a metal pole. You can scream as much as you like here, but I assure you no one will hear you, so I wouldn't bother. He said this knowing full well that his parents would only be returning to the property on Monday morning, by which time he would drive the man to another location and set him free. Right now things were going according to plan. All he needed to do was to notify the big boss, who wanted to accompany him on this mission. They would be booking their flights to West Virginia and trying their damnedest to locate this farm and find the cottage on it. For Joe Bloomberg liked nothing better than annihilating anyone who tried dodging paying him, as he took it personally if a client tried to do a runner. He was looking forward to blowing off James Harper's head. It was part of the job that brought him a measure of satisfaction. He loved the pleasure of provoking fear among all those who knew him. He loved his reputation. It was a beautiful, blissful Saturday morning in West Virginia, but I woke with a direful feeling that literally hung around me all day. It was a foreboding, menacious experience that I couldn't shift. It seemed to travel directly to my baby in my womb, as she began to kick much harder than usual in my belly, as if she too could experience my angst. Worse still, the unfavourable morning sickness that had plagued me in Seattle had returned with a vengeance. It was a nauseous, bodeful feeling that engulfed the back of my throat with a bitter taste. I found myself throwing up violently in the toilet. The entire morning I was hurling up the putrid, bitter contents of my stomach, until finally I could hurl no more. I knew that my gut had a mind of its own. It sensed that something was off. It was like an irrational, intuitive sense of knowing. Don't be silly, I told myself. You're overreacting. You're just having a bad day. Everyone's entitled to a slightly off day. That's all it is. I tried to push that continuous internal gloomy nudge that was whispering to me that something wasn't right, but I refused to give those thoughts any credence. When I was feeling a little bit better and more settled in my stomach, I visited Hetty for a cup of tea, while her husband had been helping Clive on the farm. Hetty made an unusual comment that really got my attention. You look a bit off colour today, Sasha, she said. You're having a bad day, are you? I'd nodded. I'm afraid I've been throwing up most of the morning. There must be something in the air. I saw the old man this morning. He looked exceedingly agitated. I haven't seen him like that for a long time. By the old man, I take it you're talking about Heath, the Bigfoot. Oh, I am indeed. Heath is a very sensitive creature. You know, he's very intuitive. He can sense things. I could see he seemed rather tense about something this morning. I remember he was like that hours before we had one of those horrendous storms that hit Virginia very hard when 2 of our trees were struck by lightning. Heath sensed it, you know. Wow, that is incredible. Do you interact with Heath closely? Not really. He's quite an evasive creature, really. He keeps himself to himself. But I always know when he's stressed out. He comes up to the farmhouse and looks at me through the window, gives me a nod. I know then he is feeling a little on edge about something, as if he sensed something bad is about to happen. That makes 2 of us, I said. I've been feeling an ominous feeling all morning. Hetty looked worried. You don't think that debt collector has got wind of where you're staying, she asked. How could he, I said. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. Are you absolutely sure about that? Asked Hetty. Very sure, I said, not feeling totally confident, because you can never be sure about anything when you're keeping a low profile. That night as I went to bed and closed the drapes of our bedroom windows, I couldn't shake the fraught nail-biting feeling that weighed so heavily in my gut, like cement. Even the baby in my womb had sensed my level of distress all day. She had been kicking non-stop.
"It's all right," I whispered to her. "It's all right, Sienna. Everything's going to be fine." My husband was already asleep in bed when I climbed in next to him. In the past he would have been the one that was wide awake. Now it was me that could not sleep. It was me that was restless. My husband's highly physical job meant that by the end of the day, when his head hit the pillow, he was out like a light. He was now sleeping like a baby. I smiled contentedly to myself when I heard his soft snores. It always pleased me. I began to read an exciting book, but even that could not hold my attention. I knew that sleep had eluded me this evening. I was wide awake, feeling agitated, as if I was on tenterhooks all the time. That was when I decided a brisk walk was well in order. It would help me unwind a little, I thought. I surreptitiously crept outside the house so as not to disturb my husband, and I began to take a gentle stroll. I was so glad I did. A full moon infused the velvety sky in a bright effusive light that was warm and engaging, while clusters of pretty stars twinkled like diamonds in the vast firmament, while the chorus of crickets and frogs serenaded the night in a joyful, reassuring ambience that calmed the nerves. I trekked through the tall, imposing trees of the wood grove, thoroughly enjoying the feel of the earthen floor under my feet, the cool breeze blowing against my skin. It was invigorating and refreshing. The trees swayed their large boughs in the breeze, clustered together in congenial groups, like tall solitary strangers that had decided to swagger to the music of the night, like reluctant dancers at a party. For a second I stood very still. I sensed something was watching me. I was sure of it. My eyes darted towards the solid tree trunk to my left-hand side. My eyes focusing on the tree trunk. It moved. That was then I realized that the tree trunk was actually Heath, the Bigfoot. For a moment our eyes met. I could see him so clearly in the vivid light of the moon that danced through the trees, highlighting the creature's kindly face. I knew I didn't have to be afraid, as Hetty assured me he was benevolent, but I could see that in his eyes. He was very large, at about 8 foot tall, and 700 pounds. He was built like a burly piece of formidable farm machinery, covered in long flowing hair. The creature looked remarkably human close up. I would say the only thing that set him apart from the average human being was his gargantuan proportions, the cone-shaped head and overlong arms. I nodded at Heath. He watched me as I strolled back to the cottage, ambling through the trees. I almost felt as if he was shadowing me, to be certain I was all right. I sensed his protective energy towards me. It wasn't audibly articulated, but I could definitely perceive it. The creature cared about me, as much as he cared about the trees in the wood grove. As I made my approach towards the cottage, a light was visibly on inside the bedroom. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was something terribly wrong. That light should not be on. My husband was supposed to be asleep. That was when I heard men's raised voices. "You thought you could get away with not paying me, sonny boy. You thought you could run from me. That doesn't happen on my watch. I always find the runaways. You know what happens to anyone who betrays me? Do you know about my reputation?" I told you I'd get you the money, came my husband's terrified voice. I just need time. That's why I went away, because you weren't giving me time. But I was going to pay you back. I promise. It's just you wanted it back too soon. I will raise the money for you. I promise you I will. You think I'm going to sit around waiting for you to pay me back? No, that's not going to happen, sonny boy. I need to make an example of you, as I do with anyone who betrays me, because I have a reputation to keep up. I could hear them kicking my husband hard as he cried out in dismay, "Please, please, please stop, don't, it hurts, don't, you're hurting me." I knew what I needed to do. I ran into the wood growth. "Heath, Heath, Heath," I called. It seemed like the Bigfoot knew his name, because he glided towards me. His eyes studied the expression on my face. He knew something was up. He sensed I was in grievous trouble. He briskly followed me. We both stood in the tree line, remaining still. Heath indicated for me to be as quiet as possible, as he began to assimilate what was going on. Hetty was right. He did like to read situations. He was reading the murderous energy of the events unfolding before our eyes.
My heart was thundering in my chest as my husband was dragged out of the house by two men, one who was pointing a gun at his back. I could sense these two men meant business. "Move over to that tree, sonny boy," came a man's thunderous voice. He began to kick my husband in the shins. "Oh, you're hurting me! You're hurting me! Please stop!" "Get down on your hands and knees," he demanded. "Over there by that tree. Put your hands on your head." My husband obeyed. He was physically trembling. His eyes were screaming with terror. Even though he wasn't saying anything, I could see it. "I want you to beg for your life." I could see a blonde-haired man that disguised his face with a scarf, holding up a cell phone, recording the events. I felt sick to my stomach. I mean, how macabre could you get? I imagine he was recording things to show any potential moneylenders what happens to people who betray their trust. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were about to kill my husband, about to end his life. "Please," came my husband's voice, "I will do anything. I have a pregnant wife. We have a baby on the way. She needs me. My baby needs a father. Look, I will do anything. I will raise the money for you. I will even double it if I have to. But please, please don't hurt me." "Beg for your life," the man commanded. "I'm begging you. I'm begging you. Please, I'm begging you." Tears began to stream down my husband's face, while the gun was pinned to the back of his head. "Please," begged my husband. "Please, I'm begging you. Don't kill me. I'm begging you." All of a sudden, Heath glided through the trees. He'd had more than enough. He'd seen more than enough. He moved like a steam engine on full throttle, causing such a commotion on his approach that even the ground began to heave and groan under his weight, while the branches of the trees seemed to snap. Leaves rustled. Both men, whose focus had been on James, were now distracted. They realized something hellishly big, something portentous and threatening, was looming towards them. They both sensed and felt danger. They tasted its rancid, unsavoury taste as a rapid adrenal response coursed through their veins. "What the hell is that?" said Joe, looking at Chris for answers. The young man looked shaken. "God only knows," he whispered, his trembling voice unable to disguise the sense of dread that overcame him. Then they saw the creature, standing yards away from them. Nothing prepared them for what they were seeing. This was the most dreadful, terrifying, gargantuan creature that they had ever seen in their lives. It was a Bigfoot. This creature was not friendly. The Bigfoot growled fiercely, exposing his large white teeth to the two men. They became unhinged, disorientated, as if they'd been hit with 1,000 jolts of electricity, as if they had been momentarily stunned. It was like they froze in terror, incapacitated by fear, their eyes growing wide with horror. "Shoot him! Shoot him!" cried the young man with blonde hair to his boss, Joel Bloomberg. But Joel seemed locked in a stupefied trance. He seemed unable to react. The large Bigfoot grabbed the revolver from the man, throwing it to the trees. Joel began thrashing around, fighting back with all his might. But he was no match for Heath. "Help! Help!" he screamed. But no one came to his aid. No one showed Joel any mercy. For no, he had never shown mercy to anyone a day in his life. And now that he desperately needed it, it evaded him. In a trice, Heath grabbed Joel by the legs, so he was hanging precariously upside down, still screaming at the top of his lungs, "Help me! Somebody help me! Help me!" Heath began pounding him against the tree so violently hard. The screaming subsided, as Joel, after a couple of hefty blows, became very quiet. The life was thrust out of him with every violent blow. His body became limp and unresponsive. Heath dropped the man on the ground. He landed in a bedraggled, lifeless heap. Then the man with the blonde hair was running away, while Heath glided after him, grabbing the screaming man in his hands, tossing him up in the air like an orca tosses baby seals above his head before he devours them. Heath kept catching the young man several times in his hands like a ball, as if toying with him to teach him a lesson that he was unlikely to ever forget. Then Heath let go of the young man, enabling him to escape, because he sensed there was good in this bad apple that was worth preserving. But he continued to chase him nevertheless, until the engine of a truck was heard starting up, as the man drove swiftly away at one hell of a speed. To cut a long story short, Cliff and Hetty discarded the remains of the dead loan shark on a random road in West Virginia, where they knew his body would be recovered by the authorities. James and I were now free to live our lives without the threat of that insidious loan shark Joel Bloomberg on our backs. So we returned safely to Seattle to resume our lives. I'm glad to say that Marcus Sutcliffe was released from his imprisonment in the barn. He was able to attend his wife's 40th birthday, as the blonde man returned to his parents' barn to set him free, apologising profusely for what he'd done, exclaiming that Joel Bloomberg had threatened his life, and he'd done what he'd done to save himself. But now he was free from the shackles of such an evil man. Marcus was no worse for wear, was unable to put down the gripping novel he was reading, even after he was released. It was some novel, I gather. Marcus chose not to report the incident to the police. He had empathy on the youth, who promised to change his ways. 2 months later I gave birth to a beautiful girl that I chose to call Sienna Rose, and both Cliff and Hetty are now her godparents, even though they're a lot older. But we keep in touch. I'm forever grateful to the Bigfoot Heath who saved my husband's skin that night. I know without a shadow of a doubt, without his intervention, my husband would surely be dead. I'm glad to say my husband has a deep aversion to all gambling nowadays, and he even refuses to play the lottery. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.